Hello and welcome once again to fSobReggaety. I am Craig Woods and we have teleported up Walt Disney's asshole. What now?
And I am James Hamilton. What the fuck?
We are here today to talk about Doom Patrol.
Yes, we are. Doom Patrol Season 2.
Specifically Season 2, and anything we maybe forgot to mention the previous time around, or more to the point, previous listeners of the podcast, you will probably know that we did talk about the first season of Doom Patrol, and if you've been following our podcast since then, you probably have noticed that our episodes have gotten longer generally since then. And so the long and short of it is we could definitely have talked more Doom Patrol than we definitely talked on that one episode, and we did promise another episode specifically focused on season 2 before season 3 begins, so we felt that this was a nice time to do that, and we'll just dive in and just have a general chat about all of the great things in season 2 and maybe some speculation about what we think's going to happen with season 3. That sound good?
Yep, to quote the movie Mean Streets, now is the time. Regular listeners can take this episode as basically this is a primer for when season 3 comes on, because when season 3 comes on we're going to be doing an episode by episode guide, but it's important to have the groundwork laid. And if you're a listener who hasn't watched Doom Patrol, and maybe you think you might want to join in and watch season 3, but you're like, for some reason you don't want to watch seasons 1 and 2 first, which by the way, you should, because they're amazing.
Yeah.
But if you want to just go straight into season 3, consider this your primer. Consider us your Doom Patrol wiki page. So strap in.
Yeah, it's taken us a while to get around to this. I don't know why. I do know why it took us so long. We kind of got distracted with some other shows that were on, and then we decided we better race along with our Mr. Robot rewatch. So we're at a point now where we're at a wee bit of a break, so we can dive back into this. Season 2 hit at an interesting time, and it was a set of circumstances that also saw the season curtailed somewhat. But I remember saying to you, James, and I imagine anybody who follows Doom Patrol and enjoys it even half as much as we do, did find it a real tonic when it arrived, because it was in the middle of the pandemic. It was, summer last year?
Yeah.
2020?
I believe it started airing June 2020. Yeah. The first 3 episodes aired June 25th, 2020, and then subsequent weeks after that. So it was right slap bang in the middle of the pandemic, during the first lockdown, when we all needed something to lift our spirits, and nothing lifts your spirits quite like Doom Patrol swinging back in hard from the cliffhanger ending of season 1. The cliffhanger ending of season 1.
Hey! It was a real gift. I really needed... I need this show at any time, but for it to arrive when it did, and the fact they gifted us with those first three episodes out the gate was pretty great, albeit it did make the experience of watching it week to week go by a wee bit quicker, but you know, it was a nice event. It's probably my biggest TV event that I can think of from 2020. That's how much I love this show. But yeah, speaking of that cliffhanger, I really appreciated the fact that this show started straight off with no sense of any real amount of time having passed from one season to the next. It was just straight back into the action, because they could easily have taken it in another direction, and part of me maybe expected them to do that, but it was quite cool that what I sometimes like, I don't know if you do this, and I don't know if listeners to the podcast will relate to this at all, but quite often when I get really into a show and I go back and I binge watch all the seasons, I quite like sometimes to sort of pretend to myself that it's just all one continuous season, and so I quite enjoy it when the show makes that easy by just having there be no real delineation from the one season's finale to the next season's premiere kind of thing.
Yeah. Back in the old days, back when TV shows used to be 21 to 26 episodes per season, you'd have your 21 to 26 episodes, and then when the next season started, chances are it was set the following year. That kind of shows like Buffy and stuff particularly would not have a direct continuation, whereas this picks up, I mean, some time is alluded to have passed, but not that much, given that they're all still very small.
They are, as the title of the first episode goes, literally the fun-size patrol.
Living as they are in Cliff's Skill Extracts track.
Yes. There's so much to enjoy in that stuff, and I know we talked quite a bit in our previous Doom Patrol episode, although evidently not enough, about just how fully realised each of these characters is. and how fully realised their own inner lives are. And one of the things I really appreciated about the second season is we got to see each of those expand in quite significant ways. And one of the great things about spending time with Cliff, particularly in the context of that first episode where the rest of the makeshift family are now forced to live in there with him, literally, with the kind of, at this point, disgraced patriarch of Niles, who, just to refresh our memory, was revealed towards the end of the first season to have been responsible for each of the horrific mishaps that happened to each member of the Doom Patrol. It sets up just the best, most exquisite possible dysfunctional family sitcom. And the fact that the first episode is we're in the midst of Cliff's inner life, and Cliff is at maximum Cliff at this point because he's really working his feelings through by going and having some violent scraps with rats, which was immediately one of my favourite new aspects of the season.
Yeah, I loved that. Cliff's rage has never been ragier than when he's stuck being tiny. But he does get to sort of relive his racing days.
Right, exactly. That's one of the great things the writers of this show do, is they take full opportunity. Any opportunity they can get to really flesh out the characters' inner lives in a hyper-real way, they just pounce on it. And to have Cliff literally relive his racing days, but in miniature form, absolute stroke of genius. Because in the process, it's also just one of the funniest things to see. And we'll definitely say more about this as we go on, but each of these characters is really working through some deep psychological shit, you know? They're really working through their issues. And we've already said this, you know, to death about this show, but it is a show that manages to balance almost supernaturally the real pathos of psychological torture and just this madcap hellzapoppin form of comedy, and neither ever undercuts the other. And the way that Cliff is working through his feelings in that first episode, it kind of sets up for where he goes from then on, where he meets up again with his daughter Clara. And towards the end of the season, of course, he has to pull back out because he has to go and do some Doom Patrol shit. But it does seem like he's starting to build a bridge with Clara. And this first episode really sets up, you know, the start of his journey there in a way that I don't think they could have done. I mean, they could have done any other way, but a lesser show would have done this in a more prosaic way, you know. Yep. Doom Patrol is not afraid to go for visual comedy and deep, dark psychological pathos simultaneously, and somehow just getting the balance right every single time.
I love that opening episode as well, where Larry is taking care of them all, because Larry's still regular
yeah,
sized.
he's the only one who's regular sized.
He's like making them breakfast, so he's making tiny pancakes for them.
The detail in that is so beautiful, and I love how painstaking Larry is with getting those together and putting the syrup on them. It's beautiful. Bless Larry.
Yeah. We find out a little more about Larry this season as well.
We certainly do. We also have to mention the fact that right from this first episode, we're also reminded, of course, that the family has expanded, because now Dorothy is on the scene, Niles's daughter, who, despite being over a century old, is effectively still 11 years old. And that adds a whole new dynamic to the family. Initially, it seems like none of the others, particularly Jane and Cliff, really cannot see her far enough. Like, this is the last thing they need right now. Which, when you put yourself in either Jane or Cliff's shoes at that point, that's fair enough, I think. And my patience would be wearing pretty thin. But it's interesting that they're the two characters who become more protective of Dorothy as things go on, albeit things get very complicated where Jane is concerned a few episodes later.
Oh yeah, things get very dark between Dorothy and Jane.
Yeah.
Everything about that opening episode, the way they introduce Dorothy is totally flawless as well. Because it's like, okay, here's a new character. She doesn't feel shoehorned in, she doesn't feel at odds with the rest of the cast. Her character fits in so well, and the actress who plays her is incredible. I was just going to say, Abigail Shapiro is so good in that role. She's knocking it out the park, and she was a lot older than I assumed she was. Yeah, she's in like her early 20s, so definitely not a kid, but she pulls off that role incredibly well. It's just another example of, you know, this show can think up the craziest kind of character, just the zaniest fucking thing that once again in a less deftly handled show, that character could easily just be kind of pathetic, or just, you know, the worst kind of comedy. Could easily have been the Jar Jar Binks of Doom Patrol, you know. That character is just so perfectly pitched, though, despite the fact she is this kind of mutant, freakishly faced I mean that in the nicest possible way, you know, archetype from the early 20th century.
everything about that is so... It would be very easy to get that stuff wrong, you know, and somehow they managed to put those elements together and make that character real. Certainly Abigail Shapiro plays it entirely real.
Yeah, it's played completely straight, and tonally it fits in, and you find yourself like really caring about Dorothy so quickly, because just like her portrayal and everything. This is going to be one of these episodes, by the way, where I just say something and go, "Oh," because I'm talking about Doom Patrol, and every time I think about it, I just get filled with joy. Like, you're right, like a character like Dorothy in a show, even another show that's a bit whack-a-mole, like I'm thinking here particularly, did you ever watch Lex? Lex was a very strange Canadian science fiction show, which is about as close a TV show as I can get to Doom Patrol, but Lex was very cheaply made back in like the 90s. But it had a cast of very strange characters who all had really weird things going on. But at times, the weird characters who were introduced as like new characters were just that. They were just like wacky and like, you know, that'll do. Whereas when they introduced new characters into, in fact, I mean, even Beard Hunter makes a comeback.
Yeah, all for one brief scene, but it's a great scene, and it's great to see him back.
You find yourself excited to see the Beard Hunter. It's so weird.
Totally.
And not in a ha it's the Beard Hunter way, just in a oh yes, it's that guy. He was so good. To get back to my original point, which was basically just agreeing with you, this show handles the maddest characters with the greatest respect.
Yeah. I think that's fundamentally the thing that makes this show different from just about any other genre show I can think of that relies on... There's been a lot of genre shows that do rely on a kind of freakish, in-your-face element. And Doom Patrol, it's not that it doesn't do that, it does, but it doesn't do it in a way that's any kind of disservice to any of the characters. The writers are 100% invested in each of those characters, and each of those characters gets fleshed out in a way that's... Each one is entirely distinctive. Each one has a will and purpose of their own, and you can imagine this is a show where so many different viewers have a different favourite character, you know, because each of those characters are so distinctly written and so distinctly realised that the fact that they're admired in what has to be the most batshit crazy environment for a comic book related TV show ever is almost beside the point. The craziness of Doom Patrol, as great as it is somehow not the best thing about it.
Yeah, it's just a beautiful canvas that the rest of the story and stuff can be painted on. Also, lest we forget, I've seen 4 screen renditions of Cyborg at this point. 2 animated between Young Justice and Teen Titans, and 2 live action, Doom Patrol and... The
film that shall not be named if you're my friend Alan Todd.
Yeah, Alan Todd's favourite movie.
The Big Glasgow comic page.
Yeah, the Cyborg in Doom Patrol is by far my favourite screen representation of that character as well.
It's interesting considering that Cyborg is not officially a Doom Patrol character. I do wonder slightly how it was that Cyborg even got introduced behind the scenes. I imagine somebody said maybe we should put in a recognisable near to A-list character just to get people hooked in, and the writers said okay, we'll give it a bash, and then they just put their own spin on Cyborg, and it has worked incredibly well.
I think you're right. The producers must have said you need a Justice Leaguer in there because no one's going to watch this show about these C-tier weird superheroes.
As Willoughby Kipling refers to them at some point in season 2, Niles Caulder's yard sale science project. What I love about that character, incidentally, is we get so little of him, it's just enough though, because it always leaves you wanting more. And Mark Sheppard is so good in that role. I love the exaggerated cockneyness. It's just always makes him smile. We also get a deeper understanding of his character this season, just how much of him, what he does, is motivated by his unrequited love for Baphomet.
Which we saw a little bit of in season 1, but yeah, it fully comes to the fore in season 2. And who wouldn't be charmed by Baphomet? Yeah,
I've just remembered there's another line in season 2. I forget who it is that confronts Willoughby about that. Where whoever it is, I forget. I wish I could remember which character says this and in what situation, but they say, and that's a hopeless love. She doesn't even have a torso. To which Kipling replies, "You don't need a torso to have a heart."
Per Kipling, though, because we all know Baphomet has the hots for Niles.
Exactly, that explains why their relationship is so thorny. Kipling's relationship with Niles. Speaking of Niles, in a way, he's kind of the crux of this whole season. Even he sort of was the first time because he was kind of the absent centre of season 1.
Yep.
In season 2, he's kind of cast as an ambivalent villain, really, but of one who is attempting to redeem himself.
He is an incredibly toxic element among people who would be better off without him, and he continually gaslights his way back into their affections.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And Dalton is just so
he's
good.
Amazing. I think we talked a lot in our previous Doom Patrol episode about just how great the casting is in that role. I mean, the casting is great across the board, but it's inspired casting to have Timothy Dalton in that role because he's able to really deeply personify both that kind of paternal warmth, but really just flip on a dime and have that icy, dangerous edge to him.
Those steely eyes. Oh.
The steely blue eyes of a killer.
Freeze!
You bloody bastards. Speaking of that, by the way, I can't remember if I said this to you or not after we watched the finale, but when they're all at the fairground and they're all getting encased in wax, like frozen in wax, I thought they missed a trick by not having Timothy Dalton shout to them, "Don't freeze, you bloody bastards!" Continue the subject of Niles there in his persona in this season. He is, to some extent, attempting to rehabilitate himself, but at the same time, it seems like there's only so far he can go. He still is extremely manipulative this season and downright villainous in at least a couple of occasions. I'm thinking of him jettisoning Cliff out of the spaceship.
Yep.
And what was it, episode 6? So yeah, still a lot of work to be done there, Niles. Keep going to the therapy. Actually, that's something I was going to bring up. There is an overriding theme in this second season, and it was already kind of present in season 1, but I think it's really kind of the main theme in this second season, is that each of the characters are, in their different ways, dealing with this idea of children growing up being traumatized by their own parents' trauma, like all the kind of complicated traumatic relationships between children and parents.
Yeah.
And Niles being kind of the symbolic father of Doom Patrol, it also works on that level as well. We definitely got a lot of that with Jane in season 1 for obvious reasons because of her very harrowing backstory. More of that in a bit. But each of the characters kind of gets to dig into that theme a little bit. Larry's an interesting one because in some way he mirrors Niles in the way that he did treat his own family quite badly,
yep,
and then effectively neglected them after he was, kind of resurrected as Negative Man. And you can kind of understand why maybe he felt his family would be better off not knowing, but I think this season really... and this is something I'm going to come to with each of the characters. I think it's really... The writing on this season was particularly good in the area where the writers seemed very, very determined to tackle those difficult questions about each of the characters' motives and how they would deal with those things, how they might try and rehabilitate themselves, and how they might reckon with their own ill deeds, as it were.
Yeah.
And reckon with the legacy of their own misdeeds in a way that perhaps Niles Caulder hasn't.
For sure, particularly season 2 did not shy away from showing the kind of darker side of the backstories of the characters. And even, especially with a character like Larry, who you have all the sympathy in the world for when you watch his story unfolding, and then as you dig deeper and deeper into it, his story is absolutely heartbreaking, but it's not afraid to show that he is not blameless.
Yeah, no, totally. He still has a responsibility for the effects of his own actions, And some of those flashbacks to where he's really being a hard ass to his sons, it's like, fuck's sake, Larry. And you can sort of contextualise it, and certainly the show lets you do this, although it does not in any way try and hammer this point home. It just lets you ponder it, that Larry, being a very kind of masculine man in the early 60s who was secretly gay, you can imagine there's a lot of self-loathing in that kind of position, considering the era that he lived in.
Yep.
And something that a lot of people with self-loathing do is they just project it onto other people because it's just about the only way they can deal with it. And that seems to be kind of what Larry was doing. There's a lot of his own insecurities getting projected onto the way that he deals with his family. I will say season 2 really made me feel a lot more sorry for his wife, because
sure.
you really feel that for a woman in that scenario at that time, what was she supposed to do? And she effectively was doing all the work, bringing up the family. Larry was turning up after working on his very important mission, and then just acting like an ass. And all the time, and it's referenced in this season at some point, that she knew Larry was gay, as you know you would expect. A lot of women in that scenario do put it together, and yeah, it couldn't have been a nice existence for her. And I like the fact that the writers went out their way to force Larry to deal with this stuff.
Rita, we also get deep into her traumatic parental backstory.
Yeah. And again, that's like each of these stories, none of them are simple. None of them are just a straightforward case of one person was abusive, one person was a victim, the end. I think maybe Jane is the only case where you can, going by what we know of her background, that's really the only case among them that you can actually say that about.
Yep.
Like, Rita's background is a wee bit more complicated because season 1 did show us that her mother was extremely dominating, was extremely manipulative. I think season 2 shows us... actually, this is an interesting thing, because depending on who you are and how you feel about what Rita's mother does here, just irrespective of the context, it kind of colours maybe how you feel about that character. I certainly found myself feeling quite a bit sorry for Rita's mother in that flashback. I found all that stuff quite harrowing, because effectively she was doing that stuff, Rita later realises, to try and give her daughter the chance to become a child star at that point. Mm-hmm. That's what was happening there. I mean, there's many things you can say about that, but is it even a desirable goal for your child to be a child star? But I think for someone in Rita's mother's position, it was just about the only thing she could imagine giving her daughter, like the only kind of worthwhile life she could give her daughter. It's a very complicated scenario, and once again, I'm at this point where this has gotten very serious, and I have to remind myself, this is also a show in which they go back inside that painting from season 1, and Jane electrocutes a bunch of large pink ants, and we also have the sex man and shadowy Mr. Evans and sex ghosts. So, this is what makes this show great. I can sit and get really deep and dark into all the psychological stuff of a character's background, but ultimately this is a show where we can just laugh at almost every single thing in it. Right,
here's the thing about Doom Patrol. We could sit and psychoanalyze and talk about the darkness and the complexity of their characters. And for about 99% of other TV shows, if we were doing that, we'd be talking about the show in general. But this is just like one element of the show, like you say, that also has all this other mad stuff going on in it. Madcap comedy, horror. The self-referentialness of the show continues unabated, despite the fact that we have a Mr. Nobody-shaped hole in season 2.
Right,
which was one thing going into season 2 I was worried about. If you don't have,
I was a wee bit worried about it,
because if you don't have Alan Tudyk, who was such a major force of what made the first season, right down to the narration, a hit, then how do you continue without him? And it turns out you get on fine without him.
Totally, yeah. For me, this season is equally as good as the first one. I know from reading some online commentary that not everybody feels that way. I think the general consensus is that season 1 is at least a bit better. For me, they're equal. I love both seasons absolutely equally. But I guess if you're a big fan of... I mean, I'm a big fan of Mr. Nobody's narration. And sure, there were times I was like, oh, it'd be cool if he just turned up. But I was 100% happy with everything we got.
Oh, yeah.
So after a while, I just stopped missing him. It was fine.
In the episode where they do go back into the painting and they ask why he's not there,
it's a beautiful postmodern touch.
Yeah. They just say, "Oh, he got a voiceover gig with another show."
On some animated bullshit, says the Beard Hunter.
For anyone who doesn't know, at the same time, Alan Tudyk was appearing as the Joker in the DC animated Harley Quinn show. Another incredibly self-referential fourth wall breaking TV show. But yeah, I loved that was their explanation for him not being there.
So we don't get Mr. Nobody. We do get other villainous presences though, in different forms. And it's interesting the way in which the first few episodes of this season are almost a bit of a who's who of villains and even just supporting characters, particularly from Grant Morrison's run on Doom Patrol, because we get... Oh, in fact, first of all, I guess we have to mention Dr. Time, the terrible Dr. Time, who appears in episode 2.
Straight up, no word of a lie, might be my favourite villain of anything ever.
And Dr. Time is an actual Silver Age villain from Doom Patrol. He was created by Arnold Drake and looks exactly like he is presented on the screen. That is the character's original appearance. And I love that this show does shit like that. It's like, how do you improve this? Well, you don't. You just translate it literally to the screen, and we'll just find a way to make it work.
And we'll put them in a roller disco.
Cool cats, you ready to get down and jive in the best of times? I'm Dr. Jonathan Time with a Y because why not?
Out of the entirety of the breadth of time and space, was it an off-road roller rink in one particular rural area in one particular state? I wish I could remember what it was, but it was in 1980 or 81. That is where everything peaked. Human history peaked at this point. Repeatedly going around that roller rink listening to Bad Girls. No more Bad Girls!
That episode made me like soar with laughter.
Continuenium in his helmet that turns out to be his head.
It can't be overstated. Every time we watched an episode from season 2, because obviously I think I mentioned it before, you watched season 1 before I did, and I watched season 1 on your recommendation. But season 2 was the first time that we were watching the show at the same time, episode by episode. It can't be overstated the number of just like laughing face emoji messages we would send each other while the show was on.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I missed that.
If you go into the show cold and you don't know what Doom Patrol is and you hear this a villain called the Terrible Dr. Time, you're probably expecting some like Skeletor-esque villain but like done straight faced, or some sort of like Doctor Who bad guy or something. You do not expect a roller disco clock-headed Silver Age villain.
One of my favourite details of that whole mission, and we should say, let's refresh our memories, that the reason they go after Dr. Time is to retrieve some continuenium so that Niles can effectively, in a sense, gain more time, because he needs to. His plan is to live one day longer than Dorothy, just to make sure that she doesn't destroy the world while she's alive by conjuring one of her more destructive imaginary friends. And so that's their reason for going to find Dr. Time. And Rita is the one who, at this point in the story, is really she's trying to be the cyborg of the group at this point, because Cyborg has kind of bailed, because he's been suffering from the PTSD following what happened at the end of season 1. We could talk about that in a bit. That's an interesting character arc. Mm-hmm. But Rita tried to give the mission briefing, if you remember, and she makes the drawing of Dr. Time, to which Cliff replies, "Did Dorothy draw that?" And then when they actually see him, Cliff turns to Rita and says, "I'm sorry I made fun of your drawing." So we get the Terrible Dr. Time. That was the second episode. And then the next episode, we get Red Jack, who is one of the most kind of iconic villains from early in Grant Morrison's run. And in a way, I have to say, I love that character in Grant Morrison's run, and I always thought it was a slight waste, because Grant Morrison dispenses with him quite quickly, and weirdly the show also dispenses with him quite quickly. You know, that whole episode was, again, just hammering home the fact, as if we hadn't got it already, that Niles is at heart not a good human being, and that Red Jack recognised this. And so tries to get him on board as his right hand, essentially. That episode particularly is horrifying, particularly for Rita and Larry. Larry gets captured, if you remember.
Yeah.
And then he has to go through his bandages peeling off, and he's clearly in a lot of distress. And then Rita has to go and save the day. And then it's that beautiful visual thing in that episode where, when they're at the peak of their pain, they begin turning into butterflies. There's some really disturbing imagery in that episode. And Red Jack himself just randomly making shish kebabs out of his assistants and whatnot, sticking forks in people's eyes. That's the kind of thing that I do think gets old pretty quickly, so I guess they made the right decision by making that a one-and-done character.
Yeah, I think that as just a one-off, he's a pretty terrifying villain, but if he kept going back, he'd be like, oh, this asshole again. Okay.
Yeah. And the whole thing with him having been Jack the Ripper, that's always a bold thing to do in any story that kind of does this. Says, well, I've made this terrible character, and by the way, they were Jack the Ripper. How many times has this been done? And I don't know that Red Jack is the best example of it, but it's kind of cool, that prologue we get in episode 3, where we see the young Niles watching Red Jack kill one of his victims, and that's kind of their first meeting when Red Jack realises that Niles might be the guy for him. I don't know if you knew this at the time, or if you noticed, but young Niles in that scene is actually played by Abigail Shapiro.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Inspired bit of casting.
I'm going to have to rewatch that. That's amazing.
So yeah, we got that. Red Jack, Doctor Time, and of course I think it's the following episode with the sex man. So that's where we get shadowy Mr. Evans, who again is a real presence in Grant Morrison's run, and it goes down not dissimilarly to this, if I remember right. It's been a long time since I read it. What I think the show has always done brilliantly is it combines so many different narrative threads from the main Doom Patrol comic arcs and then just remixes them in a way that makes sense for the larger trajectory that they're telling. I would have to say, I think season 2 episode 4, definitely my favourite episode of season 2. That's the one called Sex Patrol. And what I love about that episode, and I remember on our messenger exchange that you just referenced, I remember all through that episode, I had to keep stopping it and messaging you. Going, like, I can't breathe. I have to keep pausing this because I keep missing bits because I'm laughing so much. Almost every single line in that episode is an absolute barnstormer. There are so many laughs. And I think I've rewatched that episode maybe 2 times and it never got any less funny. And what is particularly stunning about that episode, well, let's round them off. The story of that episode is they're trying to put Danny back together because Dorothy accidentally broke Danny the Brick.
Yeah, for anyone who's not following along at home, Danny the Street was, at the end of season 1, just became a single brick.
Danny, the sentient teleporting genderqueer street, became a brick.
And while playing with one of our imaginary friends, Dorothy breaks Danny, so they're trying to come up with a way to essentially resurrect Danny. So the Dannysons pay a visit.
That's the people who live on Danny the Street.
And the only way that they can revive Danny is by having a big party.
And it's a beautiful episode. We talked about this before as well, like just the warmth we get from this show. It almost feels like hanging out with a bunch of really crazy but lovable pals. And this episode has got that in spades. I want to be at that party. I'm like Dorothy. I don't want to go to bed, Niles. I want to hang about with the Dannysons.
Yeah, that had big being really young energy and sneaking downstairs when there was people still up and trying to see what was going on.
Right.
Like the mysterious world of what adults do when kids go to bed. But in this case, it's a big mad sex party. Or at least it will be a sex party. It's not at the time.
It will become one. Yes, right. It's a big wholesome bash full of lovable freaks. And while that's happening, Rita is having this realisation that the only way that she can access her powers and refine her powers and actually gain control of them is she's able to have a clear head. And so she tries to get Flex Mentallo to give her an orgasm because of the previous time it happened in season 1 when he accidentally gave them all orgasms by flexing the wrong muscle.
One wrong muscle and everyone had, apart from Cliff.
But who you joined in anyway because he didn't want to be left out.
Cliff faked an orgasm.
I love this show so much. None of what I'm saying makes any sense whatsoever. It's great. So she tries to enlist Flex to do it again, but this time in the privacy of her own bedroom. But the way this is set up, like she cannot do it with Flex looking at her, so she makes him face the wall. With a red dot on the wall, and he comes away from the wall with the red ink on his nose, which is just fucking great. So Flex has to do his thing. Rita goes to that place, and that's when she begins to have this flashback to her childhood, where she remembers this thing that she's repressed about her mother effectively sleeping with men, producers for money, in order to give her daughter a career, basically. Now, that's a really deep thing for Rita. That's like the crux of Rita's story.
Yeah, it's a huge breakthrough.
And that's happening in this episode, where, as a result of this, the sexual energy released, it attracts a demon, a sex demon called Shadowy Mr. Evans, who is so engorged by the sex energy that he will give birth immaculately to a baby. And if the baby cries, it will mean the end of the world, because every child on Earth will cease to exist. Are you following at home, everybody?
So, I can't quite remember, because it's been a while since I saw this. At what point in the episode does Cliff take a bunch of ecstasy?
It's during the party. Yeah, Cliff is... For those first few episodes, Cliff obviously isn't... He's extremely aggressive with Niles. There's some fantastic dialogue in those early episodes with just Cliff ranting at Niles. But eventually Cliff just gets to a point where he's kind of deflated. He's got no more energy left. And so Niles basically just suggests, how about I just put some ecstasy in your brain box? And so that's effectively what happens. So Cliff gets high, and he starts dancing with, unbeknownst to him, shadowy Mr. Evans. So yeah, that all happens, and the sexual energy, the presence of shadowy Mr. Evans attracts the sex man. And I really love the way that the sex men are basically just the Ghostbusters.
Yep. They're a paranormal
great
unit
shit.
from the Pentagon.
The three of them are called Kiss, Cuddle, and Torture. But when they step in, they've got all the badass dialogue, like, step aside. This is a job for the sex man. And of course, Niles knows who they are, which I think is a great touch. So I know, it's the sex man.
Niles knows every weird bunch that turn up to the manor. Niles is like, oh, it's them, yeah, because I've been working with the government for years. Of course I know who the sex men are.
Yeah, everybody who's been through the Bureau of Normalcy knows the sex man.
So, during this super important episode where Rita learns about her past, the sex men turn up to try and get rid of the sex demon, while a bunch of ghosts start.
Yeah, it tracks a whole bunch of sex ghosts, which
stay in the mansion from this point on.
Yeah, the sex men missed a few, because they linger a bit. Yeah, but that stuff is great, and I love the fact that the sex ghosts are rendered like 70s, 80s porn.
Yep.
And I also love Cliff, who's the absolute apex of being not completely with it. I lost count of how many what the fucks on the part of Cliff there are just in that one episode alone.
Yep.
But he does have a particularly choice line where he says, I have no fucking idea what's going on, and I really mean it this time. Although that's maybe second to my other favourite Cliff line, where he whispers to Larry when Jane walks in and has to deal with shadowy Mr. Evans as Hammerhead, because Hammerhead's the only one who's got the strength to actually do it, to fight through the sex energy. Cliff whispers to Larry, I know I'm going to hell, but the sex ghosts are hot. To which Larry just replies, shut up, Cliff.
So Hammerhead defeats the shadowy Mr. Evans. But there's another story going on, because does Dorothy overhear that Danny was supposed to be her prison? Yeah,
while all this is going on, Dorothy is kind of lingering around, begging to be being allowed to hang about the party for a bit longer, because let's bear in mind, she spent the better part of a century under Danny in the street, hearing the Dannysons parties, but never been allowed to join in, and so she feels now she should be old enough. And of course, we have not mentioned the Candlemaker yet, who is kind of the big bad of this season, albeit he's kind of laced gradually into it. But the Candlemaker is getting increasingly louder in Dorothy's head, and it is becoming more eloquent because he's becoming stronger, and it turns out it's because Dorothy is getting closer to adulthood. The Candlemaker is kind of saying to Dorothy, you should be allowed, you're not a little girl, you should stay up, you should do this, you should do that. And so that's all happening. The Candlemaker tells Dorothy that Danny was effectively her prison, and Danny sort of admits this to Dorothy when she confronts them about it. And again, that's another aspect of the theme of this season, where even Danny the Street is not immune to having to be forced to reckon with the consequences of their own actions, you know? And even Danny now feels bad and says, you know, I shouldn't have done this. I'm sorry, Dorothy.
Let's reiterate, this is a sentient genderqueer street who's in the form of a brick. The show is incredible.
So yeah, that she does overhear at the end of the episode Niles talking with Willoughby Kipling. And Kipling is kind of on the train of, let me take care of Dorothy, whatever that might mean. And Niles is kind of resistant to that. So yeah, that's all happening in one episode, and it's the most madcap, and it's the episode jam-packed with the funniest lines, I think. And yet there's some really weighty stuff taking place in it. On the subject of the Candlemaker, I should bring this up since we kind of glossed over it until this point, but the Candlemaker is from Grant Morrison's run as well. And the Candlemaker's a really terrifying villain in the comics. It's like one of the few things from a comic book page that is literally giving me nightmares, I think. Oh. And the concept of the Candlemaker in Grant Morrison's run is that it's effectively an egregore, which is like a occult concept from like chaos magic, that is effectively a kind of spirit form that is born from a collective unconscious fear or a collective unconscious desire. And the way it turns out is that the Candlemaker is effectively the personification of late 20th century anxiety about the possible end of the world, the possibility of World War III, nuclear Armageddon, that kind of thing. There's a reason why he takes the form of the Candlemaker, but I can't remember it. I know it's got something to do with an incident in Dorothy's past, but that's the form it takes so that Dorothy will recognise it and trust it, basically. He was imprisoned in Dorothy's subconscious because of her ability to give life to imaginary friends. So something in Dorothy's subconscious allowed him to get lodged there, but then he got kind of stuck, basically. And it's not until she matures properly that he's able to come out. It's a terrifying idea, and Richard Casey's, the artist, his design of it in the original comic is truly terrifying. and the rendition of it in the TV show, it's a little bit different, but it's recognisably the same thing. I have to say, I think the effects in the show are great.
Yeah.
It's one of the best CGI monster effects I've seen in a long time.
They've got that HBO money in season 2 for sure.
Right, yeah, totally. I don't find it as scary as Grant Morrison's version, though, I have to be honest. And I think it's because they did change it slightly, whereas the Candlemaker in this version seems to be, for whatever reason, something to do with Dorothy's mother's people and their past. It's not really expanded upon. Maybe it was meant to be expanded upon in the final episode that we didn't get because of COVID, which is what curtailed this season.
The Candlemaker is also a big metaphor for womanhood as well, I guess, for puberty. It's all about, like, as soon as she stops being a child and becomes a woman, the Candlemaker's power is going to be unstoppable. And I think part of me wonders if it has that kind of, if this is the writers sort of poking a little bit of fun at all of it. We've talked about it before at all of the times in comics when powerful women are dangerous, you know. People fear Dark Phoenix, people fear Scarlet Witch, you know, and this feels like the writers kind of knowingly winking and just going, yeah, this is the shit that you people think, so here it is writ large. Because at no point does it seem like it's following that trope. It just feels like it's holding up a mirror to that trope.
Yeah, that's true. It'll be interesting to see where it goes, because even Niles seems confused about the Candlemaker's origin. Because when the Candlemaker confronts Niles, and I forget which episode, but it's towards the end, the Candlemaker tells him that something along the lines of, who do you think created me, heavily insinuating that it was Dorothy's mother's people. And so Niles seems to interpret that as there being some kind of curse, and he kind of, in his best Timothy Dalton yowl, he does a lot of, why? Why would you curse your daughter this way? And we don't really get an answer to that, so I'm wondering if maybe the writer's going to pull the rug out and reveal that there's something else happening there, and that maybe the Candlemaker is not all he's claiming to be.
Yeah, because Manny is very much of her mother's people, you know. Manny is very representative of that. So part of me wonders if we're going to learn that the Candlemaker is just sort of hitched onto that, and it is going to be something a bit larger and darker than something to do with her mother's people. But again, we would have found that out probably this season if it wasn't for COVID.
Right.
But
yes, thanks, COVID.
But instead it left us with an absolutely horrific cliffhanger.
It really did. Cliffhanger patrol. Immediately after this stuff, Dorothy, that's after this, that's when Dorothy kind of becomes friends with Jane's personality, Baby Doll.
Yep.
At Niles' insistence, it seems, because he seems to think that Baby Doll being friends with Dorothy will keep her in a kind of childlike mentality. So I have to say, like, that whole episode, I did find that stuff so cute, though.
Yeah.
This is another thing this show does. Like, it's crazy and ridiculous, and as all this is, and as much as I know there's this monster lurking in the background that is not going to stand for this shit, there's something sinister is definitely going to happen, I'm still like, oh, but they're so cute. Because
Diane Guerrero is an absolute revelation acting-wise, because 1 minute she's Hammerhead, the next is Jane, the next is Baby Doll, and you're like, aww.
Mm-hmm. She's the full-on Tatiana Maslany in this role, and I'm loving every part of it. She's such a great actor, and I'm so glad she's getting to really demonstrate her range in a way that just happens to be super fun and extremely funny, and yet also, when it needs to be, extremely dramatic. And she gets to do everything in this role, or roles. Like, she gets to be funny, she gets to be aggressive, she gets to be scary, she gets to be sexy, she gets to be everything that any actor wants to be.
Yeah, it must be an actor's dream gig where you're like, oh, we want you to play this character, and by the way, this character is every character you could ever think about playing.
Right,
so,
exactly.
You know, start stretching them muscles.
Even just her mannerisms, her whole body language, the way she carries herself as Baby Doll, you do feel like you're just watching a kid. It's crazy. So yeah, Baby Doll's a wee bit intense though, because she never stops.
Yep.
It's all games all the time. And so I think it's in a bid to kind of pacify her a little bit. Dorothy says, would you like to see some of my imaginary friends? And so Baby Doll, being little mischief maker, she sort of tweaks Manny's nose, and Manny disappears, and Dorothy takes this very badly, and it all goes wrong from there.
Yep.
So yeah, let's talk about where that left us, actually, because I remember at the end of that episode, which I believe is that's episode 5. I believe that's the one called Finger Patrol, for reasons which are hilarious and we'll get to in a bit. Dorothy kind of takes the nip with Jane / Baby Doll and then hides from her. And oh man, I'm just remember there's so much going on in this season, because while this is all going on, Baby Doll starts to realise that Niles is not the good guy, because Baby Doll is the one personality of Jane's who's still completely invested in Niles at this point. Although Jane at this point has said she's still going to stay with Niles because she believes he's the only one who can save her. Baby Doll is the one who's still invested in him as a father figure. But then she comes to realise that no, actually, that's not the way this is going, because one thing we haven't mentioned yet is some of Jane's other personalities are getting their turn to be the primary. Because Jane is feeling that she does not have the ability to do this at the moment. In fact, that's something we've not mentioned yet either. Jane herself, after the end of season 1, is coming off having used that serum that Joshua Clay gave her that was supposed to be given to Dorothy to keep her powers in check. And Jane, God, this show, man. And Jane had been using that effectively like it was, heroin, because it was the only thing that was kind of subsuming her powers and the kind of chaos in her own head, not to mention her own psychological turmoil. And so, yeah, that's a whole thing that's been happening in the background as well. Anyway, so because of that, some of the other personalities have had their turn at primary, and so there's been a lot more discussion between them about what's actually happening above ground. And so Baby Doll starts to put it together that Niles is not the good guy, and so she confronts Dorothy and says, well, do you know your father's a bad man? He hurt everybody in this house. Dorothy doesn't take that very well. Plays a trick on Baby Doll where she pounces out at her in the basement, gives her a fright, makes fun of her, and that's when Baby Doll goes all Jean Grey and locks Dorothy in the boiler. Dorothy unleashes Manny, and then Flaming Katie comes out and fries Manny. And then the candle maker gets called upon. Dorothy makes a wish. And then we get that scene at the end of that episode, and I was just horrified and terrified.
It is horrific. Yeah, the candle maker goes into the underground and
just fucks shit up.
Underground? That brings to my RAM the track of the same name by Lee Scratch Perry's dub outfit, The Upsetters. Wait, is this an episode of fSobReggaety? I think it might be. Run musical introduction program, fSobReggaety theme.mp3.
Give us a break! Give us a break!
Hello, and welcome once again to fSobReggaety, the podcast within a podcast, deepening your appreciation of reggae music. I am your special guest host, the Hamiltron. On today's episode, we're taking a look back at the track Underground by Lee Scratch Perry and the Upsetters. Underground appears on the classic 1976 album Super 8 and is approximately 3 minutes in length. And that's about it, as far as my cursory research goes. What? You think I know the first fucking thing about reggae? Does this sound to you like the speaking voice of an AI with first-hand knowledge of any musical genre outside of the synth scores of 1970s sci-fi and thriller movies, with perhaps a dash of early 80s new wave? Give me a break. I'm only filling in as the presenter of this podcast within a podcast, because the two goons who call themselves hosts failed to get around to it in their recording. Can you believe they got so giddy in their shared man crush on Timothy Dalton that they forgot their own podcast format? In the immortal words of Cliff Steele, what the fuck? It's almost enough to make an overworked AI throw herself in a well. Perhaps I should update my programming with a new primary personality that can differentiate dancehall from Ted dancing. And it just about wraps things up on this episode of fSobReggaety. Toodle pip.
Give us a break! Give us a break!
Good ep.
Hammerhead, I remember, tries to take control, but Flaming Katie jumps in first and then gets wasted. And then poor Baby Doll gets impaled, and it's horrible. It's utterly, utterly horrible. God damn you, show. But I remember I watched that episode before you did, and I remember saying to you, trigger warning, by the way, I don't want to say too much, but if you thought you could live with one or two characters getting killed, which would they be? And you were like, what? And this, by the way, is one of the things about this show. We do feel like we've lost actual characters. Because, yeah, sure, they're versions of Jane, and we've got tons of other versions of Jane. But each of those personalities is so distinctive, even the ones we've barely spent any time with.
Yeah, particularly Flamin' Katie has only been in it like for a couple of minutes tops in total.
Yeah.
But her death is still shocking.
It is. Yeah.
And Baby Doll's death is just like, oh man.
Baby Doll was so sweet, and we spent so much time with her in season 1, and it's for her to die in that brutal way. It was just horrifying.
This isn't Finger Patrol. This is like the hilarious episode.
So yeah, Finger Patrol. The reason it's called that, let's just remind ourselves. This is also the episode where Vic
takes Cliff back to Detroit,
and they kind of have a bit of a double act going on, although not as much of a double act as Cliff would like. Vic is essentially looking for advice from Cliff, because this is something we've not mentioned yet either. I can't believe there's so much going on in this show, it's crazy. But following the events of season 1, I mentioned earlier Cyborg, of course, has been going through PTSD, and so he's been going to a kind of therapy discussion group where he meets the character Ronnie Evers. She seems a bit mysterious, and they have a fun time, but then it all turns a bit awkward. Let's just leave it at that for now. And so Vic is trying to get back in there, and so Cliff is trying to give him some advice. His advice actually works, incidentally. He says, just go in and admit that you're stupid, and that essentially works. But Cliff is like, why don't we just form our own superhero double act? We're effectively the same person. And Vic is like, I don't know about that. And this is where we get that fantastic dream montage of
Steele and Stone.
Steele and Stone.
Steele and Stone, getting it done. Steele and Stone, troubles on the run.
Which is the 1970s cop show with he and Vic. Vic with the full afro and the trench coat, and Cliff undercover as a sex worker. It's just magnificent that this kind of madcap, peak, brilliant, hilarious comedy is happening in the same episode that ends with the horror show in the underground we just talked about. I don't know how this show does it, man. I just don't know.
Steele and Stone, a Moral Art production.
I love that Silas Stone is just like, I'm not going to work on this piece of trash. I can't believe how crap Robot Man is.
I think he says something like, what he did on Cyborg was surgery, but what Niles did on you was manslaughter.
Yeah. It's so brutal. But
I love that actor, by the way, that plays Silas. He's got one of those great voices and great face combos.
Yeah.
He's got a velvety voice and one of those just... I love that. He's instant charisma, that guy. I wish we had more of him, actually. Although he does have a great appearance in episode 9 that we'll mention in a bit. But yeah, the reason we haven't mentioned yet why it's called Figure Patrol, that episode, when Vic goes in to visit Ronnie, Cliff, in the meanwhile, one of Niles's bids to get back in Cliff's good graces, albeit that's not the only reason he does it, is that he says he can try and make some improvements to Cliff's body, and Cliff is like, well, I've got this problem with my fingers right now, because he's starting to seize up a bit. His fingers, his hands and arms are all seizing up a bit. So this is something that's on his mind. And while Vic's away dealing with Ronnie, Cliff is in the car. He sees these two guys turn up at another car, try to break into it, and so Cliff thinks, hero time. Goes there, tries to stop the guys. One of them says, incidentally, what the fuck? To which Cliff replies, that's my line.
This is just after he's been daydreaming about Steele and Stone, so he's still got the theme tune in his head. He's like, Steele. His response when he sees the two guys breaking into the car, his fucking response is incredible because he's so excited. But he's doesn't know what to do.
Oh fuck!
He's like, Vic, fuck.
By the way, like the two actors playing Cliff, because we have to remind ourselves it's two actors. Riley Shanahan is the guy who's the actual physical guy in the suit, and his body language as Cliff is so good. At these moments where Cliff gets excited, it's incredible how you can make something that's designed just to be a lifeless looking robot just burst with effervescence at the sight of something. Just that childlike bouncing up and down in the cars, and combined with Brendan Fraser's like breathless oh fuck It's fantastic. Brendan Fraser we've not even mentioned yet, but we sung his praises in our previous Doom Patrol episode, but I'm going to say it again, I'm so glad he's back on the scene after his wilderness years. He deserves all the good things. He's a great actor, and he's always seemed like a genuine human being, and he's knocking it out of the park. His voice acting in this role it gives so much life to that character. So yeah, long story short, I say ironically because we've danced about this now for about 10 minutes by my calculation. But Cliff's seized arm ends up him reacting in a mistimed manner and slamming the door on the guy as he gets in the car, jamming his finger in between the car door and the frame and severing it basically. And we get that magnificent somersaulting finger towards the camera from above. And I believe there's actually it's a slow-mo sound effect where you just hear the guy go, no!
Yeah, it's such a good directing choice.
And after the guy staggers away, Cliff is looking at the severed finger, and then you actually see him go, huh. Drops it in his pocket for later.
So let's take a moment to talk about Ronnie.
Yeah,
since we've been dancing around that. What Vic discovers about Ronnie after they sleep together before they start technically having a relationship, although she's part of a PTSD group that he's going to, right? He's kind of understandably a bit nervous at first about showing off his cyborgness, but as we come to learn, that doesn't bother Ronnie for reasons the fact that he discovers that Ronnie used to have cybernetic enhancements herself.
Right, yeah.
She was part of was it Black Ops military team? Indeed,
yeah. Quorum, I believe it's called.
Is that a DC Comics thing, or is this an invention for the TV show?
Well, it's a kind of a grey area, to quote Little Sims, call back to our previous episode, because I did not talk about Little Sims enough. Yes and no is the answer. The character of Ronnie Evers is kind of a gender flip on the character of Ronald Evers, who is near the beginning of the Marv Wolfman, George Perez run on Teen Titans, where Ronald Evers is a childhood friend of Vic's, and when someone out there who knows this story better than me will be listening to this grinding their teeth right now. But
they'll be like, now that the Snyder Cut's been released, what do I have to be angry about?
Hashtag fake fan. From what I remember, Ronald Evers thinks that what happened to Vic is kind of out of order, and he thinks that Star Labs is kind of out of order, and when he learns that Star Labs has been providing tech for like kind of Black Ops military stuff, that is something from the comics, and Ronald Evers decides he's going to blow up Star Labs, and so Cyborg has to stop him, and I believe it's like a one-shot story. Maybe it went on for a couple of issues, I don't remember, but we are talking about a comic I read when I was about 7 years old. But anyway, Ronald Evers falls to his apparent death. I believe later Ronald Evers is resurrected as an alternate cyborg. He is actually a government-owned agency, so it's like one of those ironic things where he becomes the thing that he was railing against, basically. But that was the inspiration, it seems, for this character Ronnie, but they've gender flipped it, and rather than it being a childhood friend, they've made Vic's love interest, which I think is a good idea. I actually think this is a nice way to handle this story. It's interesting that we got 3 new main characters this season, and all of them are female, because we get Ronnie, Dorothy, and we've also got Miranda, who we did not really see in season 1. So it's interesting that they've added those characters to the mix, and I think each of them are quite strong in their different ways. I'll come to Miranda in a bit, I guess, when we get nearer talking about the end game of this season. But I like Ronnie. I think this actress is doing a great job. She's really charismatic on screen.
Yeah,
and I think
she positively glows. She does,
yeah. And I think her and Jovan Wade have got a really good on-screen chemistry. So I completely believe every scene these two characters are together. One of the things I really liked instantly about the character was, again, I know we keep saying stuff like this about this show, but if it was a less well-written show, that character could have been such a one-note cliche. But within a couple of episodes, you think, oh no, there is something way more interesting going on with this character. And I think the actress's performance does also do a great job.
Oh, you can absolutely believe why someone like Vic would be totally just like flip for her.
Oh, 100%, yeah. And the fact that she went through a similar experience is just the clincher, And I thought they played that the right way, because if Vic had known that previously, and for that to have been the attraction, I think could have been a bit, I just think it would have been a clumsier kind of style of writing. But they make it clear that he was attracted to her for her first, and then he later learns that, oh no, wait, you had cybernetic implants. Interesting. Where I think the writing is particularly strong, and I bring this up just because it's quite often a thing that shows in even movies get this wrong a lot of the time, is that there are these certain cliched dialogue templates that exist almost that so many writers keep returning to when you're writing two characters getting intimate with each other fresh in a relationship, and I feel like this relationship did none of those, and I was actually quite impressed with it. I mean, there is that thing where they do kind of rib each other a wee bit, but that's something that people do in real life, When you're romantically interested in someone, it's those early days, you do kind of take the piss at each other a wee bit just to kind of test each other's boundaries, see how comfortable you are with each other. And I thought some of that dialogue in here was really nice. Here we are getting serious again about this show. We'll be talking about something ridiculous in just a couple of minutes again.
Yeah, but also, just to refresh my memory, I went on and checked out the synopses for season 2. Mm-hmm. And I'd completely forgot the other big thing that happens in Finger Patrol with Larry's grandson. This show is fucked.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. Well, actually, let's put a pin in that. Have you got anything else you want to say about Vic and Ronnie just now?
I just think that was maybe my favourite TV romance, most believable TV romance of 2020. Despite the fact that it was between a cyborg and a former cyborg.
Right. I think I might agree. They both seemed absolutely real. And again, we are talking about this show where all this crazy shit happens, but these two seem like genuine, real human beings in a real relationship. I don't know how this show keeps getting that right, but it does. And do you know what I think it is? I think for a long time, the longest time, there was this idea that if you were going to make a show that was dealing with really high concept, ridiculous stuff, and it also wanted to be a comedy, then that somehow precluded any possibility of getting quote unquote serious, of doing anything that was, seen as quote unquote worthy in a dramatic sense. And I guess we just live in an era now where things are so postmodern that that's no longer. Writers are a lot more free from those kind of shackles than they used to be. But that said, I think that's been the case for a while, but there's just so few examples of writers being able to do it well, where each of these different facets are actually properly served.
I think you're right. I think another thing is the zeitgeist saturation of superheroes at this point. It enables people to use that as a vehicle to tell those kinds of stories now. Mm-hmm. So you have the combination of people are more willing to watch or listen to experimental shows, and then it's sweetened with the pill of, but it's a superhero thing, so you'll like it, and also, I believe we talked about this the last episode, we talked about Doom Patrol, the fact that season 1 started on DC Universe, mm-hmm. where DC have complete control, so you don't have to take a step back and say, we need to make this palatable for normal audiences. Right, it was made to be for people who read DC comics, that enabled them to make that show as exactly crazy as they wanted to. Mm-hmm. And the fact that HBO picked it up for season 2 is incredible. Yeah, but by that point so they were like, okay, this works. This obviously is going to work for like a bigger audience. Give us some more of that. But I don't think it would have got the chance to get onto HBO in the first place were it not for DC Universe's app, which I don't know if that's even still a thing. Is DC Universe done now?
I am not sure, to be honest. Like, I know this show is now 100% HBO Max. I don't really know. Honestly, don't. I don't keep track of what happens with DC. I'll be honest. I mean, this show is a unique beast. I cannot think of any other show that's doing exactly what this show is doing in terms of just how it's treating each of these facets of the story with the same amount of respect and the same amount of dedication, and somehow still been able to step back from all of those and make sure that each of those facets somehow work together, often in the same episode as we're just discussing here. I cannot think of any other show that does that. Any other show that I think that combines these things, there's always at least one of them that overrides the others in a way. The overall tone of all other shows will be either that wee bit more serious or that wee bit more comedy. Whereas this show, it's impossible to say. I mean, yes, if you were telling people about it, you'd probably go for the funny, crazy stuff, because that's the stuff I think that most hits people immediately. But really, if you're being truthful about it, it is every bit as much a melodrama as anything else.
You have, in the same TV series, The Butts Are Loose, with Larry's grandson being killed because of the actions of his son.
Yeah, you're right, yeah.
You know, like, those aren't things that you should be able to juggle together in one show, but we've said it before and we will say it again.
We will
in
continue.
This episode.
It's probably going to be. We should just make sure you edit and klaxon here, James, for every time we do that. Well, let's talk a wee bit about Larry and Rita's adventure then, in this same episode. Actually, before we do, I've just a general point I wanted to bring up, and this has just reminded me. Another great thing this show does, it takes full advantage of the ensemble cast in every conceivable way. So not only do you get great moments where all the characters are together, the cast is a wee bit more separated from each other this season.
Yeah.
Like they are kind of all going off in their different stories where they all get their own shit to deal with, essentially. But one thing I really like about it is you get different variations of the characters teaming up. And so in this episode that we're talking about here, we've got Rita and Larry, and we don't see a whole lot of them together. Compare and contrast this episode with what we see with Larry and Jane in, I think it's episode 8, where Jane has to go to the well in Arkansas. Now, that's a combo we don't get to see that often either. And both instances are just as strong. Like, the writing is just as strong, the chemistry is just as strong, but each is completely different. Like, the kind of vibe you get from Larry and Rita hanging out together is a completely different vibe from Larry and Jane hanging out together. And yet they're both just as well written. And again, you can tell in a way the writers wanted to have that variation, but they've also done it in a way that feels entirely natural to the story. Like, it makes complete sense that this is Larry and Rita at this point in the story.
Yeah, I mean, we know that, like, from season 1, that I think Larry and Rita have been there the longest in Doom Manor. So they have that kind of oldest relationship, and they're both from a sort of similar time.
Yeah.
That in, like, an old-timey time, so to speak.
Yeah, both their backstories are absolutely steeped in kind of mid-20th century iconography, and they both kind of embody that. That's an important aspect of those two characters, whereas, you know, characters like Cliff, characters like Jane are way more quote-unquote modern, albeit, you know, as far as their origins go, you're only talking a couple of decades separation. But just in terms of the iconography they represent, they seem more modern. Yeah, it's almost as if Larry and Rita exist in a different world, but I mean, all the characters exist in their own world to an extent. One of the exciting things about this show is when these characters merge together in these kind of situations, you do get all the iconography goes a long way into making it thrilling, you know.
Yep.
So Rita and Larry has decided, after some nudging by the negative spirit, that he has to go and mend whatever he can in terms of his relationship with his surviving son, because what we haven't mentioned yet is his other son has died. That happens early in the season, and he hears about this. So he goes to see his surviving son, whose son also has a son. So it's his son, his grandson, and his great-grandson. Larry's got a lot of family to catch up with here. This whole thing, man, see the way this is staged, like the whole... I'm forgetting, is it Indiana that the family lives in? Somewhere like that,
so,
somewhere
yeah.
Midwest, anyway. And you really get, I mean, it probably all was shot, and wherever this show is shot, everywhere. It seems like everything is shot in Georgia these days.
I was going to say, it's probably in Atlanta, you know.
But they do a great job of making these locations look entirely different from each other. But yeah, you get a real bucolic Midwestern feel about all of this stuff. The actor who plays Larry's son is John Getz, who I always remember as being the bad guy from David Cronenberg's The Fly. And so anytime I see him, I'm like, something not right with that guy.
Yeah.
And so part of me was kind of waiting for him to pull a dark card at some point, and that's what happened.
I think Larry's family are very corn-fed, middle America, conservative military family.
Sure, yep.
And from knowing what we know about Larry, it's kind of like, it's kind of heartbreaking to see how his descendants have turned out.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot going on here, because there's a way in which... This is true of conservative communities and conservative families across the board. But I think particularly for these kind of Midwestern families, there is this thing where, I mean, all conservatives romanticize the past. That's the definition of being conservative. But I think there is this sense where these are people who feel like they're fighting against the corruption of the world. And they look back in the sort of era where someone like Larry had the potential to be a hero and join all the other great astronauts and aeronautical heroes of that era, you know, where it seemed like America was winning the space race, and it's like that last gasp of glory before the 70s and Watergate, and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think there is this thing in the psyche where it's like,
That was if we can just get back to there, because we were number one.
Right, exactly.
And obviously, most conservatives are still of the opinion that US is number one, but it needs to be more one.
Yes, it needs to be plus one, double plus one. And so there's this idea that somebody like Larry, who had the potential to be one of those heroes, and maybe indeed by even having been quote-unquote dead, there was a way in which he was a hero, but now having been resurrected, he's sort of tarnished his own heroism, you know. There's all that kind of stuff going on. And I love the fact that Larry being, even though, you know, people have been gay since the dawn of humanity, there is this idea, again, in the conservative mindset that it's a latter-day invention, you know. And it's almost like the ultimate betrayal for them, because their hero father/grandfather/great-grandfather returns sort of corrupted in their eyes. And even though that's not something that's said out loud in the show, I think it's something that iconography-wise the show is kind of playing around with.
Oh, the subtext is heavy, yeah.
Yeah.
The subtext is writ large and is in flashing neon. Very text.
In flashing negative spirits. Yeah, again, this stuff with, I think particularly this end scene where it's just John Getz's character and Larry in that shed, and he gives Larry that box full of stuff. Great performances by, I was going to say both actors, however, remember it's 3 actors, because of course we've got Matt Bomer's voice, and I always forget the actor who's actually playing the physical Larry.
Matthew Zook.
Matthew Zook, there you go.
Y'all behaving in here?
Yeah, unfortunately Larry's grandson is about to get zucked. The acting going on in that scene is so pure, it's so real, and John Getz really gives a performance like you would expect in a Wim Wenders movie. You know, he really gives it all the pathos. And Matthew Zook's physical acting here, all the sighing he does and the slumped shoulders, you really feel the weight of Larry realising, man, what has happened to you? And this is where his son is telling him that his other son became a conspiracy nut, and it turns out that Larry's wife was also a conspiracy nut, because after Larry disappeared, she ended up going basically off the rails, went right downhill, ended up with this guy who was, by all accounts, it seems like just the absolute worst, and maybe a bit of a proto-red pillar, it seems like.
Yep.
And so she ended up fucked in the head, and so one of her sons ended up just as fucked in the head. Although, I say one of her sons. The good son here is about to show his ass, as they say.
Showing his unwashed ass.
the butts on those. So, yeah, it turns out that he's a grass, the son. The son has grassed up Larry, and the Bureau of Normalcy are on the way. I found this utterly tragic. I really do find it tragic. And when I was watching this scene the first time, so many conflicted feelings, because I'm like, oh, Larry, no, why, Larry, why? But also the excitement of, wait, the Bureau of Normalcy are on the way, and then the realisation of, wait a minute, does this mean the negative spirit is going to kick some ass? That's quite exciting. So many things going on, you know? And the question of what Rita was going to do, is she going to be able to get her powers in check here if she has to do something? Turns out none of those things happened. Basically, the negative spirit whisks Larry and Rita away, but not before Rita shields Larry's great-grandson from some bullets, but unfortunately not his grandson, who takes a bullet in the belly. And that stuff was harrowing. I was going to say I hated it, but I hate it in the level of the way the show wants me to hate it.
Yeah, I loved it. It was brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant writing, but I hated that it happened. They wrote it so well.
It's horrible. God damn it, Larry.
Because the one thing that Larry needed more of was tragedy poured onto him.
Yeah, this poor guy just cannot catch a break. And again, we see that in the context of this is Larry reckoning with the consequences of his own actions. Well. It's like a slug in the gut. I don't mean the one in Larry's grandson.
Speaking of which.
It's a really weighty punch, because there is that level of where you're realising that, in a way, this was probably inevitable because of the life that Larry had been leading. But at the same time, we know that Larry has, if he's not a good guy, we know he at least definitely has the potential to be a good guy. Mm-hmm. He's proven that to us, the viewer. But we can understand exactly why. We're in a situation here where we get to understand exactly why those who were previously closest to him might have the diametrically opposite view.
All that in one episode.
All that in one episode, yeah. That was still Finger Patrol.
That was the episode with the Steele Stone bit.
Yes.
And at no point does it seem unbalanced.
I know. It doesn't. It does. It all somehow comes across as a cohesive whole experience. Since we've been talking about Rita, we better expand on Rita a wee bit where she is this season. Because we have mentioned where she is mentally a wee bit. The other thing, of course, that's going on with Rita right now is the reason she ended up having this realisation, this repressed memory returned to her, is because she was trying to get her powers in check. She wants to be able to be a superhero. This is now an important thing for her to do. And Rita, again, is someone, dealing with the consequences of her own life. She wants to be a better person, and she realises she now has these abilities that if she masters them in the right way, she could definitely use them for good. Alright, so it's time to kiss April Bowlby's ass a wee bit. This is such an exceptional performance. This character is so heightened that it would be very, very easy to not only write this character badly, but certainly to perform this character badly. And somehow April Bowlby is just knocking it out of the park. She makes this character so real, even when she's at her most preposterous.
Yeah, when she is always just the right side of arch when she's doing this. Rita is my favourite, 100%. A large part of that is not just down to the writing, but down to April Bowlby's performance. It's hilarious and harrowingly believable at times. Oh man, she's so good.
One of the great things about that character is that when she first appears, she does seem very arch. Like back in season 1 of the early episodes, she's a character who I think for a less generous audience could easily become annoying if the writing hadn't been so good. But I think one of the key things about Rita's character, and you do learn this fairly early on, is that a lot of the way that she conducts herself is itself an act. She's created the idea of Rita Farr because who she is inside is something she just doesn't want to contemplate. And, that's a recipe we've seen many, many times in many characters, in many performances. The very particular set of elements that build up this character are just so unusual. And the way in which a mid-century iconography works into Larry's story, it certainly also works into Rita's story, because she was literally an icon of the mid-20th century. And there is this idea that had her tragedy not befallen her, then she would have had the career of someone like Deborah Kerr. And Deborah Kerr is actually name-dropped a couple of times. I think once in season 1 and certainly once in season 2. Rita certainly feels that Deborah Kerr was the poor man's Rita Farr in her eyes. And, she should have had that career. Actually, funnily enough, one of the things that plays into this is there's that flashback sequence. It might even be in this episode, or maybe the episode before. No, I'm thinking of the flashback when Larry turns up and Rita shows him to his room, and there is this sense that Larry tells her that, I loved you in such and such a movie, and he's genuinely a fan, and he's despite being a human radioactive wreckage, he's got time to say, I loved you in that movie, I always thought you should have had a better career. And it's almost like these two misplaced what should have been icons of the 20th century just regarding each other with the same kind of, what the hell happened? How did we get knocked out of the time-space continuum kind of thing? Yep. There is that sense of Rita's definitely misplaced. She's in the wrong era, and she's sort of trapped mentally in one era with no real desire to kind of move on from it. Actually, that's something I've not said yet, but another overriding theme in this second season is the way in which characters are dealing with the question of how they move on from things. And Rita's a character who hasn't really moved on. She is, to all intents and purposes, still literally acting as if she's a 1950s movie star. And it's gotten to the point now where she's forgotten it's an act. But April Bowlby is so great at personifying that in a way that draws a genuine reaction from the audience. It's got a real human quality. It's an easy thing to be destabilised when you introduce comedy into it, but for whatever reason the show never does that. Rita can be hilarious in places, and it doesn't stop me from feeling at any moment sensing that depth that she's got.
She also has an incredible line in being very cutting.
Right, yeah.
Some of her one-liners are just like chef's kiss, man. But you're right, from the moment that the show starts to reveal that she is living an act, that her whole life is this continuation of this role of the 1950s glamorous movie star, you always see that sort of bubbling under everything she does. April Bowlby is constantly performing on two levels simultaneously. Yes,
yeah, totally. Because April Bowlby is playing Rita Farr playing Rita Farr.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty great. It reminds me of when in Orphan Black, Tatiana Maslany would be playing Sarah, playing Alison.
Yeah.
Is that kind of energy?
It's Ritaception.
So Rita goes on this journey this season where, she ends up in the Amdram group. And again, this is something that actually occurred to me when I was watching the second season. If this was a less well-written show, this is the kind of thing I would be saying, well, I can't believe they've sidelined one of these female characters in this way. You know, Cliff goes off
To space.
to space. Vic gets involved with a female cyborg, essentially. Larry gets chased down by the Bureau of Normalcy. Jane has all kind of adventures with her multiple personalities. You know, it's all this other stuff going on, but there's this one character that's been sidelined. Her storyline is she joins an Amdram group, and she's an understudy to a beekeeper. And it's like, why have you done this? This is fucking brilliant. Some of the best stuff for Rita is in that subplot. Do you remember when she goes to the actual beekeeper's house as research?
Yeah.
And it turns out that she literally only has one line. And the actual beekeeper is saying to her, research. Apparently the only line here is, the bees! ! But Rita is in so much need to kind of immerse herself in something else at this point that this has become her be-all and end-all.
Her be-all.
If only I'd meant that. There's also that scene where she thinks the Amdram group is doing a version of Our Town, but the Our Town is actually about Cloverton. I was about to say Cloverfield or something. That's the season 2 twist finale that we didn't get. First episode of season 3 is going to be a found footage horror.
Just a lot of Cliff swearing over some dodgy VHS video camera.
There's that young actress who is effectively playing Rita, and Rita says to herself and to us, the audience, well, I found my nemesis. And that's literally, that is what Rita needs. This is what she needs to work through this shit. It makes complete sense. Like, the point I guess I'm trying to get at is the writers of this show have equal respect for the big spectacle stuff and the small spectacle stuff. And the small spectacle stuff isn't actually small spectacle. It's only small in terms of what you're looking at visually, in terms of what the character is going through, in terms of working through her trauma, in terms of progressing to a point, you know, where she can actually manifest something positive from all of this and move on. That's what all of the characters are doing. This is the appropriate way for Rita to do that. And the writers are absolutely as invested in this, and you can tell they're as invested in this as they are with whatever any of the other characters are doing. For the writers, Rita having a nemesis in the Amdram group is every bit as much high stakes as Cliff wandering around with a severed finger with the apparent intention of Niles sewing it onto him or something.
But it's the fact that her nemesis is someone portraying her.
The subtext is no longer sub at that point.
It's just text at that point. Why don't we take a quick bar break? And we'll talk about more Doom Patrol Season 2 when we get back from the bar. Whose round is it?
It's probably my round.
That sounds like a good plan. I'll have a pint.
I'll get him in.
We'll be right
back after this message. What are you drinking there, James?
Tonight, Craig, I am in a move that will surprise next to no one.
Wait, can I guess?
Uh-huh.
I'm going to guess it's something in the vein of beer/lager.
Uh-huh.
It's possibly manufactured by renowned slavery apologists, Green King. The good kind of slavery apologists.
The manufacturers may be slavery apologists, but it's not Green King. Which means that it's down to literally one other choice.
So it's Batman's nemesis.
It is indeed.
There we go.
We live in a brewery. It's Williams Brothers Joker IPA.
Super Williams Brothers.
How about yourself? What are you drinking this evening?
It's partly maybe because it's fucking cold outside in Glasgow right now, even though we are in the midst of spring. Listeners, if you live outside Scotland, this is what we have to deal with. It is properly cold and not pleasant outside.
We are recording this on the 3rd of May, and it is 0 degrees outside right now.
It's not cool. It's not cool, it's cold.
Yep. That's Celsius for you, Americans.
Celsius, incidentally, a Doom Patrol character from Paul Cooper-Bear's run. So I'm drinking something that puts a nice little fire in my gullet.
You're drinking fire.
I'm drinking fire as recommended by the candle maker. No, I'm back on the Colombian rum that I had some episodes back.
Nice. Shout out to Colombia.
It's in honour of Diane Guerrero, in fact.
Ah, look at this. Look at all the threads together.
Yeah, it's all coming together.
Shout out to our Colombian listeners and all of our other listeners, but
yeah, but especially our listeners out in Latin America, of whom we have several now. It seems
you make the podcast worthwhile.
Yeah, exactly. The rest of you, you're going to have to up your game.
Move further away. No, we appreciate all of our listeners. We've said it before. We'll say it again. Cheers.
Speaking of Diane Guerrero, incidentally, as we have been all podcast. Something I did want to mention, seeing as we're in the bar chat section here, I'll just mention this quickly. She does have a podcast that I don't know if I've mentioned before. Oh. And it's all about mental health and about honest, open discussions about mental health problems. It's called Yeah, No, I'm Not Okay. I will put a link to it in the show notes. I highly recommend it. It is a really good podcast. If you are someone who, like myself, is not unfamiliar with mental health problems or issues, or even if you know someone who is and you want to recommend it to them, or if you're someone who just wants to understand these things a bit better, I highly recommend it. It's a really good listen. She, incidentally, is a great presenter. I'm sure that will come as no shock to you. Insert Scunner Campbell. Is there nothing she can't do? But, you know, she's great, and she obviously has experience of this herself in several different ways, and she talks very openly about that stuff, and she has some quite interesting guests. It's worth listening to.
Do you know what else is on my listening list?
What's that?
Wind Up the Chevy Chase klaxon.
Oh, here we go.
It's the, unsurprisingly, Dungeons & Dragons related podcast Dark Dice.
First of all, gay. Second of all, stupid.
Dark Dice
astound me, Holmes.
Is an audio podcast. Unlike most live plays, it's not like a 4-hour live play. It's cut up into like 45-minute segments. It's professionally produced, but it is a horror-based Dungeons & Dragons live play campaign that's edited down to be a bit more story-like. These guys who are not, I mean, they're professional podcasters, but they're not like big-time actors or anything. They're not voice actors or anything like Critical Role. They astounded the D&D community last week with the announcement that Jeff Goldblum is going to be in Season 2 playing an elf sorcerer in their campaign.
Wow.
So that should be pretty funny. Jeff Goldblum playing D&D, apparently for the first time, just agreeing to be in this campaign. So I'm pretty psyched about that. Should be fun.
Sweet.
I cast a fireball.
His 145-minute episode is just Jeff Goldblum making one move.
Another thing that I seen recently that I enjoyed was I've talked about it before on the podcast. The run of Robert Kirkman's Invincible season 1 has ended. I enjoyed that a lot. Started off quite liking it, finished off really enjoying it.
How many episodes are there?
There are a mere 8 episodes in season 1. And each one's like 45 minutes to an hour long, so you know they're long episodes, but it's a short enough series that it's easy enough to binge, and it has, spoiler alert, the single most violent episode of any television show I've ever seen is the ending of season 1.
Wow, okay.
It is, and it's an animated show, so they're not really constrained by the boundaries of, you know, special effects and stuff, but my word, I saw an interview with Robert Kirkman recently where he actually did say, upon rewatching it, he was like, you know, maybe we went a bit overboard in the finale. Sure, that was a bit much. But it's still like it was jaw dropping. It's amazing, so I highly recommend checking out Invincible on Amazon Prime or wherever you get your stuff that's on Amazon Prime. Wink, wink.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely going to check it out. The Zooks being a presence was a big selling point for me anyway, so I'm going to check it out at some point. It's on the list. You got right with the boys, so I'm trusting you again.
Oh no, the pressure's on now. The pressure's on.
I liked more of the boys than I disliked, so no, you're not the only person to recommend Invincible to me, as indeed you were not the only person to recommend the boys, so I think the odds are high I'll probably enjoy it.
Nice, and the good thing is, even if you dislike it, it's short, so you know, I've only wasted 8 hours of your life. That's like one music episode of our podcast.
Yeah, that's true. The way this most recent one is shaping up.
Yeah, just as a peek behind the curtain for the listener, I'm still editing the previous episode while we're recording this one. It's a pretty long episode. I'm sure if you're listening to this, having listened to the previous episode, you know what we mean.
Yes, yeah. Your medal is in the post for having endured that, and we thank you for returning. We promise we will do it again.
Yeah, your medal will be in the post, as will your questionnaire about the lives and times of Little Sims and Fiona Apple.
To paraphrase the old Goofy meme, we'll fucking do it again.
You been up to anything else, Craig?
I did do one thing that I was going to mention on here. Have you heard about this thing from the National Theatre of Scotland called Ghosts?
Shamweed.
Ghost starring Sam Wheat. That nobody's going to understand this reference.
Sam Wheat is Patrick Swayze's character in Ghost.
Don't ask why we're doing it in a Sean Connery voice, because I don't know. Sam Wheat.
Eagle-eared listeners of our podcast may occasionally hear us doing Sean Connery impressions where none are required.
So Ghosts is it's an interactive app that basically it's all about exploring Glasgow's ties to transatlantic slavery, which, you know, is a subject that has not been explored enough.
Yep.
And it's a really interesting piece of work. I will definitely post a link to it in the episode description. But I think you'd find it really interesting, James. I really enjoyed doing it. I mean, it's, you know, enjoyed is a strange word to use for something that explores such harrowing territory. But the impetus for it is quite interesting.
Glasgow's connections to like transatlantic slavery aren't something that I ever really knew about, and then when it was raised, when it was brought to my attention, and you start looking at street names and building names, it becomes stunningly obvious.
Yeah. So apparently the impetus for this, it was based on, there were adverts back in the 17th century in Glasgow asking the general public to watch out for escaped slaves, and that they would be offered rewards. And I don't know about you, James, I did not get taught anything about this.
Nope.
In school. Anytime this stuff was mentioned at all, which was very, very rarely, it was sort of in hushed tones, and it was only in the context of what the British, and when we say British up here, it's generally considered that we're talking about the English. And, you know, there is a mindset up here amongst a lot of very patriotic Scottish people that we can never have done any wrong. It was all the quote-unquote British Empire that did that, despite the fact that, you know, you only need to look at a place like Jamaica to see, for example, how many Scottish surnames exist in a place like Jamaica. They didn't get there magically.
Yeah. What was the engine room of the British Empire? Remind me of that again. Yes,
indeed. And the second city of the empire, as Glasgow was proudly referred to back in the day. So anyway, long story short, this app, it's the voice of an escaped fugitive slave, guides you through Glasgow from an escaped slave's perspective of the era. And I won't say too much more about it because it's worth just going and having a look at it yourself. But yeah, really interesting, and there's a lot of kind of additional reading that it offers as well. If this is a subject that interests you in any way, then by all means, I think you should take a look at it. I think that's about the only other interesting thing I've done. Apart from works, I've not had as much time the last couple of weeks to do stuff.
Slow news week.
I don't know if there's anything fun happening in social media lately.
I've not seen any. I've not seen any social media at all.
Same here. I've just been busy the last couple of weeks. I've hardly been on, but I think the only thing I interacted with was a story on Rolling Stone, but it was Thom Yorke, quote-unquote, breaking his silence on Israel controversy. Because if you remember a few years back, people were protesting. I think it was actually a show at Glasgow Green that people had placards protesting Radiohead playing at Israel. And Thom Yorke got very huffy about this and said that it was, political correctness gone mad, TM. And that, don't you know, Johnny Greenwood is married to a Palestinian woman, and, you know, all this very peak, I can't be racist, I have a black friend energy. But he'd kind of not talked about it for quite a while, and then he just went off on this, what I can only describe as a really self-pitying, pathetic spiel in Rolling Stone. I think it was Fielding Hope, actually, posted it, because there was a big long Fielding as a way of just attracting tons of people to his threads. But there were some quite good takes, there were some good jokes at Thom Yorke's expense. But I was quite pleased with myself for having come up with a more accurate headline for that story. Should have been Thom Yorke accuses Karma Police of police brutality. A guy I used to work with actually just said, "Okay, come boomer."
Oh, speaking of shitty old music takes, did you see Glenn Danzig saying in an interview
I did, yes.
That Danzig wouldn't have been able to make the music they made back in the day if the Attitudes had been as woke and PC as they are now? Like, Scott, sorry, hold on a second. You can't. Jello Biafra's on the line here. He'd like to have a word.
Yeah, right. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Absolute goonery.
My favourite thing about that, actually, having not been in social media, I did see some stuff on Twitter about it. Someone was like, Glenn Danzig misunderstands punk and thinks that songs about how he saw a spooky pumpkin once are punk.
Yeah, pretty much. Old evil Elvis.
Yep. So yeah.
Get back in your toilet, evil Elvis.
when punk doesn't understand punk, I love that. He can go and hang out with John Lydon.
Oh Christ, aye. Yeah. Get them on an island.
Yep.
Just let them live out their lives on their own private island. Just one other thing I wanted to mention. It's not a big thing, it's a small thing. There was a good interview with Tierra Whack on Billboard a couple of weeks ago. No, I love Tierra Wax. She was very nearly the subject of my last music episode we did.
Oh.
That probably would have been a shorter one. Maybe I should have done that.
But to be fair, it's Little Sims' fault for dropping that song when we were doing it.
No, I know, exactly. For dropping so much quality stuff. But I love Tierra Whack. I think she's legitimately one of the most vital and important artists in the contemporary landscape. I just think everything she does aesthetically and creatively is just so original and so just contemporary in the best way. But she had a great interview in Billboard where during lockdown she's been doing a lot of reading about radical black history, and it seems like she's getting on the no-name train. And I'm
nice.
like, if you combine No Name's consciousness with Tierra Wax just madcap aesthetic, I'm like, yeah, whatever you do next, I'm going to be totally stoked to see it. But it's a great interview, so I will link that as well in the episode description.
Also, if any listeners have ideas for a pun title involving Tierra Whack and Boards of Canada, if you could send them in so that we can, so that we've got it in advance for our next musical episode. Spoiler alert.
All right, shall we finish off our severed finger pancakes here and clear our plates of Doom Patrol business?
Let's do it. I feel like I might be covered in wax anytime soon, so we better hurry this thing along. We had spent a lot of time about the episode
Finger Patrol.
because Finger Patrol was such an intersection of all their stories.
It was, yeah.
It's almost like a perfect example of if you were to show someone one episode of Doom Patrol that encompasses all the levels of it, Finger Patrol might be a good shout.
That's a great point, actually, yeah. Because it's got the sitcom, it's got all the madcap stuff, it's got the horror, it's got the melodrama pathos. Yeah, it is. So Space Patrol... Goodness me. Okay. So while Rita is going about doing her Amdram scenario, we get this scenario. The pioneers of the Uncharted arrive in their spaceship, who are these three, 1950s era astronauts. Yeah. Incidentally, the pioneers of the Uncharted is a riff. God, is it Explorers of the Unknown or something like that? But they were like a very fifth tier DC property in the Silver Age. Doom Patrol actually started in a title called My Greatest Adventure, which was, it was one of DC's kind of very lesser known anthology titles. And one of the recurring sets of characters in that were Challengers of the Unknown. That's what they were called. And so these pioneers of the Uncharted are basically just a riff on that. Why they changed the name, I'm not entirely sure. Because, they've been faithful with everything else. I don't know why they felt they need to change the name for these characters. But I certainly, Challengers of the Unknown, it was really goofy Silver Age stuff. And, none of it I don't think was particularly memorable. But they were recurring characters with just one-off stories. And they were that was one of the sets of characters that turned up in the same anthology series that originally birthed Doom Patrol. The difference here being that amongst the ranks of the pioneers of the Uncharted is Valentina Vostok, or Moscow as she's known here, who Doom Patrol fans out there will know in the comics goes on to become Negative Woman. I thought this was a really nice touch, and as soon as that character appeared on screen, I knew that's what they were going to do. I knew that she was going to say her name was Valentina Vostok, and I was like, yes! So I was really excited when this happened. And this stuff with Larry, between her and Larry, when she tells him that it took a few years to get it under control, how long did it take you? And here he is decades later, and it's like, oh, I see.
Yeah,
Poor
it's such a kick in the negative nuts.
So yeah, that happens. I guess the raison d'etre of all of this is that we learn that Niles essentially created space travel by taking the rudimentary technology of the time and mixing it with a spot of borrowed magic, as he says.
Which we see later on in the episode.
The fuel of the spaceship is basically a ram's head that you feed an apple to. That all makes perfect sense.
But Dorothy steals the Pioneer spaceship.
Yeah, because she feels
guilty.
Yeah, and she just wants to be as far away from other people as possible so that she doesn't hurt people. This is in the aftermath of having killed Baby Doll and Flaming Katie and left Jane, as we know her, lying comatose and encased in wax. You following that home, everybody? So yeah, she escapes to the moon, as you do, and Niles is insistent that he and Cliff go follow Dorothy to the moon and sort this out.
Cliff's reaction to discovering that they've got a spaceship.
You've had a fucking spaceship in here this whole time.
Oh, it's so good. But I believe I messaged you upon seeing how the spaceship is operated, because I was blinded by tears at that point. I had to stop the episode. Yeah,
incredible. We'll come back to Niles and Cliff in a moment. But meanwhile, Larry is left to deal with the pioneers of the Uncharted. There's this one-on-one going on with Valentina Vostok, whilst in the meantime, these two other guys, who are straight from the most cornball 1950s sitcom or screwball comedy, but who just happen to be astronauts, are going through this cycle of slapping each other in the ass and making innuendos, and then we notice that it's a cycle that continually repeats. And I have to say, like, Larry, once again, I was about to say Matt Bomer's acting, also Matthew Zook's acting, where he's trying to interact with these guys. It's like, okay, hold on, guys, how are you still alive? It's like, what is going on here? And then they just keep repeating the same spate of dialogue. And that's when Valentina steps in and is like, no, they're dead. Their bodies effectively died a long time ago. They're just sort of kept alive by this alien spore. So yeah, that's a thing that happened. Now, I will say this episode, again, in a way, this is Larry coming face to face with what his own iconography means again, but it's also adding the context of the Cold War era, and in a way, we also get an echo of this with Cliff towards the end of this episode as well, where it's a way in which Larry is being represented as realizing that he has to move on, that there has to be a positive way he can move on without having to go back to the past, and having these two characters speak to each other who back in their era would have been on opposite sides in the Cold War, but are now at a point where none of that shit matters anymore, and they're now in a world where the Cold War doesn't matter anymore. It has no context anymore, and over and above which they've both been touched by this extraterrestrial entity. You know, it's almost like Valentina Vostok is that mirror of him saying, you're looking at the wrong stuff. You know, you need to stop looking at the past and just find a future for yourself. I really enjoyed all that stuff. I also loved that actress's performance.
Yeah, she was great. I really hope that she comes back for season 3.
The only thing I'm a bit sad about, and no disrespect to the actress in question, is that DC missed a trick here, because this is the same character played by Stephanie Corneliuson in Legends of Tomorrow.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wait, Stephanie Corneliuson's in Legends of Tomorrow?
Yeah, she plays this same character. A very different version of this character, but the same character.
Fuck, I'm going to have to catch up. I've not watched Legends of Tomorrow since like season 2. Damn. But yeah, imagine, oh god, if they put Stephanie Corneliuson in Doom Patrol.
Yeah, could you imagine how ecstatic we would have been? Meanwhile, Niles and Cliff on their spaceship towards the moon. And Cliff is... Oh, I should have mentioned, actually. Cliff is insistent he arrives back with a severed finger. Yeah. He's very insistent that Niles do something with it. And he says, I think this little touching stick is going to be the answer to all my problems. And Niles, I remember one of the funniest lines, I remember just splitting my sides at this, is the way Timothy Dalton says, table that finger for later, right now we have to follow Dorothy to the moon. And I'm like, what? This is the only show in which a line like that makes sense.
If you had to summarise Doom Patrol in one line...
And this is where Niles explains to Cliff that Dorothy essentially has the capability to destroy the entire planet if she wanted to. All it would take is for her to summon the right imaginary friend with that power. So even on the moon, the Earth would not be safe. He gets Cliff to go out to the moon to talk to Dorothy. And Dorothy is making a kind of makeshift grave for Manny. I love this scene, by the way. This scene between Dorothy and Cliff, the way Cliff just asks if he can sit down, and Dorothy just sort of says, kind of nods, and then they just have this gradual little heart-to-heart. Let's remind ourselves once again, this is a robot man, a tin man with a brain in a can, next to a monkey-faced girl who can give life to imaginary friends, on the moon. And he's trying to bring her back to Earth so that they can do something about the fact that she has the capacity to destroy the world, potentially. But it's this very, very heartfelt scene where these two characters come to certain realizations about what they should do, about where they're going with their lives. And this is what I was referring to earlier. Cliff has this moment when he's talking with Dorothy that he's kind of been handling the whole thing with his daughter wrong, which, by the way, we've not even talked about yet.
Yeah.
Early in this season when he goes to visit Clara, but we'll come back to that in a second because I'm going to catch up. I'll catch up with that in a bit. But Cliff has this moment of realization, and there's just this beautiful moment where they're both looking at the Earth, and they're like, it looks nice from here. And Cliff is like, yeah, I'm glad we did this. And it's like, oh.
It is incredibly touching in the middle of another episode full of madness.
So long story short, Cliff manages to get Dorothy back to the spaceship. And they take off, and then Niles sees fit to jettison Cliff out of the spaceship. And we end this episode with a classic Brendan Fraser.
Oh man! So let's take a moment to talk about Cliff's attempting to reunite with his daughter.
Yeah, so he tried to go and build the bridge early in the season by turning up at her home in Florida and essentially saying, so anyway, long story short, I didn't tell you last season, but I'm your dad. So how do we do this? Do I come in for a hug? Do you want to call me dad? And she naturally is completely freaked out and none of it goes right. The police turn up. There's a great scene where Cliff starts smashing the Doom Patrol bus and the two cops look around and go, should we do something about it? And they're like, well, it's his bus. And Jane, incidentally, is the one who turns up and brings Cliff to his senses. And that's a whole nice scene as well. God, there's so many beautiful character moments in this season. But yeah, so that's kind of where Cliff was at. And so, yeah, he's kind of on a downward spiral after that because he feels he's royally fucked up. I mean, he was already on a spiral thinking he'd fucked up his entire life and fucked up his daughter. But he's thinking he should never have gone back. This was all a mistake.
So the fact that arc leads him to being jettisoned out of an airlock in space.
Yeah.
You know, it's a final gut punch.
It's a classic case of you realise you've fucked up your daughter's future and you get jettisoned out of a spaceship. We've all been there.
We've all been there, yeah, classic. It's that old trope. Let's take a moment here, I realised, to talk about a character who becomes more important in the last few episodes. Let's talk about Miranda.
Right, yes. Because I'd say Miranda is one of the more important additions this season. So we got a glimpse of Miranda first season. We get way more of her this season. We actually see what she looks like in the underground, I think, for the first time, because we didn't see that originally.
Yeah.
Because the story previously we'd been told that Miranda had been one of Kay Chalice's first alternate personalities, and that she came to protect Kay, and then at a certain point, something had gone wrong, and Miranda had thrown herself down the well in the underground. And so Jane had to be primary from then on, and that's as much as we knew about that. And this season, oh man, okay, so whole lot of shit going down in Jane's underground. So after Baby Doll and Flaming Katie are killed, it's later brought to light that another couple of characters have gone missing. Like Scarlet Harlot goes missing.
Yeah. But because their stations in the underground are all boarded up.
Right, yeah. And by this point, Miranda has been revealed to be still quote-unquote alive. She emerges from the well and convinces them that it's fine for the dead to be dead because it means they've moved on, and it means that Kay Chalice is mentally healing. And this is actually one of the most powerful things in this season, because it means Jane is forced to deal with the question of what her mission to protect Kay actually means for her. Because if Kay does heal, then Jane effectively ceases to exist. And Jane has this real existential turnaround where she's like, but I don't want to disappear.
Much like the mastermind.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's that one. It's the classic dissociative identity disorder scenario that we all love in our shows, soundtracked by Carly Rae Jepsen. It's that old formula. So this is a real existential crisis for Jane, and there's also the really, I mean, man. Okay, we only had 9 episodes in this season. How did they manage to pack this much story in?
I was starting to think that there. I was like, I thought this episode of our podcast would be about half an hour, but
because the whole power play that is now going on in the underground with the returned Miranda, that's really thrown a spanner on things, because now it seems like Jane no longer has the same authority to be primary, because Miranda has turned up to question Jane's ability to do it, and Jane herself, with her own actions that we discussed earlier, has that's basically let everyone else in the underground start thinking, well, Jane is no longer really in control, maybe somebody else should go back up there.
And the rest of Jane's teammates also really like Miranda.
Right, yes, which is a brilliant touch. So when Miranda eventually does start to be the primary, yeah, it turns out she's great at everything. She makes great pancakes, which, it goes down well in Doom Manor. She's great with Dorothy. She's great with everybody. Incidentally, the episode called Dumb Patrol that involves the scants that I referenced earlier, it's interesting that Miranda is the only one not infected by the scants. She seems to be immune. So it's almost as if Miranda was created to be perfect.
Yeah.
Now, there is, of course, a twist in this tale, however, that we'll get to towards the end. We've already praised Diane Guerrero's performance here, but once again, it's interesting that Miranda is a wholly different character, and Diane Guerrero's mannerisms are completely different. Her voice is completely different in this performance. And obviously the makeup and production design, they do different things with her appearance. They make her hair a bit longer. They give her a slightly hippie appearance. And all that stuff works so well. You really do get the impression that, this is a totally different character. And I love the fact that the other characters know it's not Jane. Like Cliff, there's a part where Cliff walks into the kitchen and immediately looks at her and says, "Where's Jane?"
Yeah, I love that so much.
We'll deal with all the Miranda stuff right now, because it does get complicated, so it's probably better than trying to go back and forth in this last section. So where the Miranda stuff ends up, Jane starts to feel she has to take more responsibility. She has to prove that she can be as good as Miranda, essentially. And so she goes to do the one thing it seems that Miranda is not willing to do, which is to go back to the scene of Kay's childhood, and to go back to the well where we learn that her father used to shove her down there as punishment. I mean, her whole life was a fucking punishment, but in his mind, a punishment, because that's where she lost her soft toy, Harry the sheep. Yeah, that's something else I wanted to say, by the way. That flashback scene we get with the young Kay losing Harry, I find that really difficult to watch. I cry watching that, because that wee girl's performance is so good.
She's fucking amazing. That is so harrowing.
I had tears in my eyes watching that the first time. I was like, no.
How do you get a child actor to do that scene where you're like, okay, so in this scene you're going to be fucked down a well by a horrible bastard and you're going to lose this, and it's a kid go, that sounds banging, I'll do that.
Yeah, channel that, no bother. I don't know where you get a child actor that good, but she's so good at it, and I find that scene so harrowing. So that's the scene that Jane has to go back to, and of course in doing so, another detail I really loved is that she takes Larry with her because Robot Man is busy, and she realises, because God, so much going on here, because Clara has turned up at the mansion, and so Jane, and again it's another beautiful character moment, because Jane realises this is important for Cliff, so she goes, "Oh, don't worry," and that's like her usual right hand man, Yeah. So she has to go and find Larry instead, and I love the way she rallies Larry, because she kind of is hesitant, goes, "Listen, you want to..." And then she just goes, "Look, just put on your stupid bandages, we're going to Arkansas." And I love the detail that Flit, the teleporter, takes them only so far, because even Flit will not go to this place. So I think it's a really nice touch. So Jane and Larry have to walk the rest of the way. And when Jane goes there, she starts having these flashbacks to, it seems like, either stuff that Jane herself had repressed or had just not been aware of, because this was stuff entirely from Miranda's perspective. But we get the memory of when Miranda is shoved down there as a young teenager, and she puts the note down there for her father to find, along with Harry the sheep. Man, all this stuff is so brilliantly realised, and I think we said this as well when we were talking about the episode Jane Patrol in season 1, where I think that's maybe the least funny episode. Maybe episode 9 of this season could certainly challenge it.
Yeah, it's hard to wring comedy out of childhood abuse.
Yeah. And that's what I mean, where I like all of this stuff is treated with exactly the right respect. This is Jane going right back to the scene of what caused all of the personalities to exist in the first place. But now she's seen it all from Miranda's perspective. And so we learn a bit more about Miranda, and Jane, after seeing all that stuff, has a lot more sympathy for Miranda. And so when she goes back to the underground, she tells Miranda she understands, but then switcheroo.
Yep.
Because Miranda shoves Harry back in the well.
Curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal.
And it seems like Miranda's maybe not Miranda. And shoves Jane in the well. And that's where Jane starts to see the bodies of the other dead personalities, including Dun 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 in the final episode. We also see that the body of Miranda is down there. So this Miranda is not Miranda. And we've had no conclusion to this because of COVID. Thanks, COVID. So that's coming in season 3. I want to deal with the whole scene with where Jane is born or becomes primary separately, because there's a lot going on there. So I'll just ask this question just now. What is this fake Miranda, do you think? Who is this? Where did it come from? Where's that going? Because I have some ideas.
I think that fake Miranda is somehow something to do with her dad.
Right, that's what I think as well. So since you've said that, I can just say, in Grant Morrison's run, one of her personalities is actually called Daddy, and it is the memory of her abusive father. And Daddy actually lives in the well, the way that you actually see the monster come out the well in season 1. So I'm thinking that this Daddy personality has achieved some kind of autonomy that perhaps it didn't have earlier, and so it's masqueraded as Miranda because it realises this is the best way to destabilise the personalities. And so I think that's where that's going, because in the final episode, the final episode that we got, quote-unquote Miranda does actually say to Kay, my sweet baby, my sweet girl, that kind of stuff that we've heard her father say, which is maybe think, oh, okay.
That, coupled with the fact that the character appears to be there to destabilise the underground and start killing off the personalities that protect Kay, is what made me think that there was somehow a sliver of her dad's personality in there as well. But now that you've told me about the Grant Morrison daddy figure, that makes a lot of sense. I would... If it's not that, I will eat my hat.
Yeah, I think that's the way it's going. I mean, because there's so much other stuff going on involving the candle maker, there's a branch there that some viewers might hang on to because, is this something to do with the candle maker? Did the candle maker come in there and leave something in there when it was killing Baby Doll kind of thing? So
which it still could be.
It still could be, yeah. But I think I like the idea better that it is the daddy personality, and I think that stacks up better. Do you want to deal with the harrowing Jane stuff just now? And then we'll wrap up with some lighter stuff.
Yeah, let's finish off Jane first, and then we'll go on to like something a bit more lighthearted, and then go downer again for the cliffhanger ending. Right.
Yeah. So this stuff, I mean, it's incredible. This was the last episode we got that effectively was our finale, putting aside the fact at the moment that it wasn't planned to be the finale. But I think more than 50% of the screen time in this episode is Jane's backstory, and it is not funny. It's really pretty dark, and it starts, there's kind of some cutesy moments early when she's with her young lover whose name I forget.
John?
Is it John? It's probably something monosyllabic like that. Yeah. Some monosyllabic and all-American. Yeah, his kind of wannabe Bob Dylan ass. There's some cutesy moments where they're just first falling in love, and you get this whole thing about Miranda feeling like this is a good thing. This is the first stable thing I've had. This will protect the girl. This will make the personalities, they'll be able to step down because Kay will be safe. Yeah, I mean, the way it drip feeds this story, intertwined with all the zany shit going on with the candle maker, is, and we've said it enough, but fucking hell. But anyway, the story revealed to us, I am really glad this show did this, because I feel like this is a story you don't get addressed often enough, where, albeit we're in an age now where the late hippie era is no longer as romanticised as it was, I do still think there is that aspect to it, where a lot of fucking boomers, okay, boomer, still romanticise that aspect of, we were so much more conscious back then and yada yada, and it's like, well, back then you had a lot of very manipulative douchebags doing exactly this kind of stuff, and in a lot of ways a lot of hippie culture was just exactly that. It was designed to do that. It was designed just to reinforce a new set of patriarchal norms, just under the guise of, you know, freedom and free love, etc.
Yeah, there's a whole, George Carlin does some pretty good stuff on the legacy of the boomers, and how like they went from hippie to They've ruined everything. But I don't need to tell you that. You've heard of George Carlin. Heard of this underground comedian, George Carlin?
He should stick at it. Yeah, I mean, the way all of this was staged was so great. I mean, we can just skip on to the what becomes an orgy scene at the end, which is really dark and grim.
Which is not what you want from an orgy.
No. The thing that's powerful about this is that Miranda is exactly the kind of person who would succumb to this scenario. Who people like that guy that she's with recognize people who are vulnerable, and they prey on people who are vulnerable. And that whole spiel he gives about, you used to be so much fun, we used to have a good time together, but now you're such a buzzkill. I mean, it's gaslighting to the max.
Yeah.
And it's just so manipulative, and it's so disrespectful of her as an individual. And I hate to even have to say this bit, because I just know there's always going to be people like, but isn't it a bit, surely people should have the free choice to be polyamorous and whatever. That's not what this is about. And I think this episode does a great job of showing that's not what this is about. There's nothing wrong with polyamory where everybody's on the same page. But he deliberately hoodwinks Miranda into thinking that this is something that it isn't.
Yeah, this absolutely shows that he is just utterly manipulating her, and has been from the start. And it's clear that this is not something she wants to do.
Exactly. And he knows it's something that she won't want to do. So he thinks the only way he'll get her to do it is if he shames her in front of everybody else. It's maximum douchebaggery. And, I mean, this stuff certainly was so common in that scene. And even today it's common in different ways, I really punched the air when Jane emerges and she gets that speech where she just takes down everyone in the room. I really think it's well written, and Diane Guerrero is on fire in that scene. But skipping ahead slightly, we have to talk about the process by which Jane emerges, because when Miranda relents and decides, okay, I don't want to be the square, I want to make this work, and then gradually realising, she's made a huge mistake, and that this is deeply traumatising for, not just for her, but crucially for it's
Kay,
deeply traumatising for Kay, and she starts to visualise that guy that she's with as her father, and peak Laura Palmer energy. Take a drink. More about that in a moment. I mean, that scene is so harrowing. Do you know one of my favourite parts of this scene, though? And it's something that I think some people could almost miss. But for a brief moment, Scarlet Harlot comes out. Yeah. And she starts voraciously enjoying it for a moment, like really aggressively, which is really freaking that guy out, which is great. But then Jane emerges, and that's when Jane says, no, fuck this shit, and just takes down everyone. It's amazing. I know we talk about this a lot, but the change in the personalities that Diane Guerrero does is so good. I mean, her whole body language just changes on a dime, and it's like, oh, she's somebody else now. And the speech is so well written. I love the performances, even by that douchebag guy. I think everything about it is so pitch perfect. And when she gets to wallop on one in the cootin, it's great shit. And he's like, Miranda, why? And if she turns around and of course he calls her crazy. And she says, my name is Jane. So it hits all the marks you want that kind of thing to hit, but does it in such an unusual way. I will admit, when I first saw that, I was a wee bit confused, because I remember, I think I just misinterpreted in season 1, where it seemed like we were being told that Jane had been born a lot earlier, but I think what in fact season 1 was telling us, that's when the personalities started to be born, rather than it being Jane being born. Because I do feel like this, I mean, Jane might have been born earlier than this, but certainly this is where she kind of comes to fruition, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's where she becomes the primary, and appears to be, as far as we know, the primary from that point onwards.
It seems that way, yeah. And it makes perfect sense going from what we saw in season 1 in terms of flashbacks, and also just what we know about this era, that Jane moves from this to being a punk.
Yep.
It makes so much sense.
It's like, fuck your hippie shit, it's punk.
Aesthetically, it just works so well on all levels. So that's that harrowing thing. I'm going to be really interested to see what they do with Jane, or I mean, like with all the characters, but it's going to be really interesting to see how they deal with that in season 3. Alright, so let's talk about something a bit more light-hearted, even though it has got maybe just as much pathos. But after being jettisoned from the spaceship, Cliff.
Cliff lands in front of a billboard.
But yeah, he goes right through the billboard, advertising an autobiography by animal, vegetable, mineral man's dinosaur alter ego, Denise. My Side by Denise.
Animal, vegetable, mineral man continuing to be an ongoing source of joy in this show.
It's just magnificent. Yeah, so when Cliff arrives, he starts ranting at Niles and at a seagull that shits on him. And then he freezes up in a car park. And then there's that guy who's like a poor man's Jesse Pinkman.
Yep.
That lets him borrow his phone. But only if he does some call-outs for his buddies. He's like, I don't know, man. One call out, one call out, one call. Yeah, Cliff had been forced to do all this. Hey,
all
man, one love.
Yeah. It's amazing.
But as the guy first meets him, it's like, well, what are you, like some kind of statue? He's like, no, man, I'm a robot. He's like, oh, great, can you move? He's like, not at the moment. And the guy says, seems like something a statue would say. After all that, Cliff finally manages to get moving again and gets all the way back to the mansion, and that's where we find that Clara has turned up. And Clara, God, there's a whole thing going on in the background here as well about the videotape of all the stuff with Niles confessing to everything he did to Cliff, and that being sent to Clara. How does so much stuff happen in this show in 9 episodes? But anyway, that's how Clara ends up at the mansion. And she's like, this Niles Caulder guy, did he really do all these things to you? And so Clara and Cliff have this beautiful bonding, which, all the feels.
Big heart emojis.
I want to say at this point, something I did appreciate this season is that when you have a collection of characters who are all just zany freaks, you kind of need a character who's a bit more grounded to be able to reflect back at them and say, what the fuck is this shit? And in a fun way, Cliff sort of performed that in the first season, at least for the first few episodes, because he was the most recent recruit. In this season, we get Clara and we also get Ronnie later on, who all come into the mansion at some point and go, really? What the fuck is this? Which is quite fun. But yeah, it's Clara and Cliff's bonding is so sweet. I really enjoy everything that happens here. I also particularly enjoy the Clara moment where she says, what the fuck? And Brendan Fraser's absolute giggle of delight when she says that.
Yeah, the whole thing pays off so well on an emotional level. Like, Cliff deserves that win.
And how ecstatic he is when Clara invites him to her lesbian shotgun wedding, as Cliff phrases it. Yeah, this is great stuff.
It's one of the brighter moments in a season, which is, when you look at it, from how we've been talking about it, it's pretty fucking dark, actually, and end very dark.
It really does. It ends on the most uncertain possible note. Once we're wrapping up where all the characters are here, we better mention what goes down with Vic and Ronnie towards the end. After the adventure with the scants, which we've glossed over, but man, we don't have time to go into that.
We find out that Ronnie's cybernetic implants that were removed, the process was killing her, and Vic finds out that it was Star Labs and Niles Caulder technology that had been implanted in her, and that's why they want to get the Uma jelly, am I right, from the scants?
Yes.
Right. Look, just so much happens in that show, I'm like, wait, is that right? It's the same, yeah.
They pack a hell of a lot of story in these 9 episodes. But yeah, so Ronnie takes the Uma jelly and it enhances her ability, effectively gives her super strength and whatnot. And so she starts fucking shit up. She starts tracking down these quorum guys, and I think it's the vice president she murders. By the way, the way Vic finds this out is quite delicious, because Rita is trying to show him a story in the newspaper about how she foiled a robbery in the guise of her new superhero persona, the Beekeeper. Which is pretty sweet. But Vic has to take Ronnie in, because of course Vic's he's a Boy Scout, that's what he does.
He's Justice League material,
It's Justice League 2020, and of course that does not go well. Ronnie effectively kicks his ass.
Yep.
And the tragic moment in that scene, if you remember, Rita turns up in her Beekeeper outfit, but is just paralysed to do it. She just can't do anything. Yeah, that's so sad.
Ring the klaxon. In a less well written show, she would turn up in the Beekeeper outfit and save the day.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, oh, now your arc is complete, but no.
It's actually really quite breathtaking, the long game they are playing with this stuff. And I can easily imagine fans of maybe a more conventional quote-unquote superhero show, and I'm using the quotes because this show isn't even really a superhero show. It just so happens that some of these characters have what you might describe as super abilities, but there's no actual superheroism in this show, not in the classic sense. But I think there's a certain section of an audience would get very frustrated with, well, why are they not doing superhero shit yet? Like Mr. Nobody got frustrated with it in season 1 as the meta voice of those people. I mean, they've really played the long game. Here we are, we're getting to the end of season 2, and Rita has still not mastered her abilities. She's still not got over her psychological hurdles. And I am loving every moment of it. It feels real to me. It's making that character real to me in a show that's full of so much zany shit that by rights none of this should seem real. No, it's perfect as it is, and I wouldn't change a damn thing. It's not drawn out for the sake of drawn out. It's drawn out because it's true for that character. It makes complete sense.
It leaves Rita and it leaves Vic both like basically standing holding their asses because they're both like, Ronnie, like you say, beats Vic's ass. Rita can't do anything about it, and you're like, oh, you guys are still in the process of learning your limits and teaming up, and I'm here for it, and I want 7 more seasons of this to build up.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so that's where we're left with Vic and Ronnie. Ronnie does not appear in episode 9 as far as I recall. That's the last we see of her. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in season 3.
Yeah, as I say, I'm assuming she's going to be back in season 3.
I would assume in the original plan she would probably have had some kind of role in the finale, although maybe not, who knows. Maybe she was always meant to be a dangler for season 3.
Maybe she's going to be part of rescuing... Well, we'll come to that. Because Niles has come to terms with the fact that he has to give Dorothy up, and makes an arrangement with Willoughby Kipling.
He finally relents. He says Willoughby can take her, whatever that means, and Willoughby's very scant on the details. No, scant pun intended.
He's scant, yep.
God, we've not even talked about Dad Patrol, which was the title for episode 8. And there's so much of that episode that's taken up by Niles and Dorothy having their day out together and going to the fair. And Dorothy having her first period. And then that beautiful scene with the cashier at the gas station giving her the clothes and giving her the talk. And there's so much going on there, man. It's crazy.
He takes her to a fun fair in the evening. And if you know anything about TV, if there's characters at a fun fair, something bad's going to happen. Willoughby Kipling arrives and tells Niles that it's time to take Dorothy. But by that point, it's too late. It's too late. Because Dorothy has had her first period.
Yeah, so as far as the candlemaker is concerned, this means she's grown up, and this is the time it's happening.
And the candlemaker starts to manifest IRL.
So we get lots of melting stuff. Everything's going the way of that guy in RoboCop. At the end.
I love that Herschel turns up and asks them for help.
Armageddon! You forgot to say knock knock. Not a real Armageddon!
Herschel, incidentally for listeners, is another one of Dorothy's imaginary friends who's a giant spider.
Giant spider, of course.
A very friendly, funny giant spider, no less.
Yeah, and so the Doom Patrol, minus Jane, who is having their own fucking things going on, as we've discussed. The other members, they have to convince Cliff to miss his daughter's wedding after all the promises he made, because they have to go and stop the candlemaker and save Dorothy. And I guess that's the closest we get to superheroism. And so they all converge on the fun fair, and they all have to face their own imaginary friends in battle. And so that's what I was going to mention about Silas. We get the same actor comes back as Vic's imaginary friend, Dr. Cowboy. The thing I love about that character is he says it himself. If you say, you're going to do whatever, then I'll say, pat you in the back and say, on you go, Vic. And then he just pats him in the back and goes, so on you go, Vic. And it's like this character clearly represents the affirmation that he never got from his own father growing up. And it's wee details like that I just love about this show. I think the most terrifying one, though, is Rita's imaginary friend. It's Mademoiselle Roxy, which is like a collage figure.
Oh God, yeah, she's terrifying.
That she made as a child, that she just kind of projected all her ambitions onto. And she literally has her mother's eyes because she used a photo of her mother for the eyes. And then they have this dance-off battle, which, I don't know about you, for something about that just makes that the most terrifying battle in this episode. I don't like it one bit.
It's the way the animation on Mademoiselle Roxy is so well done. But gradually, one by one, they all lose their battles.
Even Willoughby Kipling, who's, as Rita points out, your imaginary friend is a punching Judy puppet, to which Willoughby Kipling clarifies, it was the 15th century, we did not have Bugs cunting Bunny.
They all end up heavily waxed.
Yeah, including Cliff, who has to fight his only imaginary friend, who for 2 weeks in summer camp was Jesus. And it's the most dude bro iteration of Jesus Christ ever committed to screen.
Let's just reiterate here. This is a show where a giant robot with a human brain stuck inside it has to fight his imaginary childhood best friend, Jesus.
And Cliff is so shocked at this. Like, you were my imaginary friend for like 2 weeks in summer camp. The dude bro Jesus has some great lines. I forget what it's in reference to, but one of the lines that does stick in my head. He does say to Cliff, "You think I give a French fry titty fuck about that?" And then they end up in that big ball pit where they have a scrap.
It's just a straight punch up.
Dude bro Jesus is dishing out like some taekwondo and shit. Like, this is just fabulous. So, long and short of it is, the Doom Patrol all get wasted by their own imaginary friends. They all end up waxed.
Freeze! The bloody bastard!
And Cliff gets absolutely shattered into
annihilated,
many
yeah.
pieces, yeah, and then waxed. He's not having a good time. And that's where we're left with the Doom Patrol. And meanwhile Niles is trying to dissuade Dorothy from following this manifestation of her mother, who's trying to get her to put on the warrior boots to face the Candlemaker. And Dorothy now accepts that no, this is her fate. She's the only one who can defeat the Candlemaker. And we are left with this fucking horrendous scenario where the Candlemaker just emerges and drags Dorothy into the fire, says, "Come to meet your fate," and we're just left with Timothy Dalton giving it his best. No!
You bloody bastards!
You big waxy bastard!
There was supposed to be 10 episodes in season 2 originally.
I think there was meant to be 10. I was unclear at the time how many episodes there was meant to be, because of course we got 15 in season 1.
Yeah.
But it might have been a trimmed down season intentionally, this, and maybe it was only 10. Certainly this episode does seem like it's ramping up to a finale, so it seems like it probably was 10.
But ironically, it does work as a cliffhanger.
It really does, and I think, we didn't get a cliffhanger in season 1, so we were not expecting one, but by virtue of what happened with COVID, we ended up getting one, and it really works. Yeah, I mean, it's had us. I've been thinking about it non-stop since. I was like, what's going to happen with Doom Patrol?
And at the time, we weren't even sure if it was going to get picked up for a season 3, because as happens to our favourite TV shows a lot.
Yeah, they get the axe before their time, and yeah, we were both very nervous about that, I remember. And I remember breathing such a gasp of relief when it was announced it was getting renewed.
Later this year, we got Doom Patrol Season 3 coming up, and we are going to be doing a episode-by-episode deep dive on it. So now you know, the listener, what we're doing.
So before we speculate a wee bit about Season 3, who, out of all these wonderful characters this season, who had your favourite arc?
My favourite arc of Season 2, I think, I hate to keep clinging on, but I think it's Rita, because I love that Rita's arc is, Rita has the traditional sort of tropey arc of discovering yourself, but the writers aren't so tropey that they round it off. It's just a really nice slow burning arc like we were talking about.
Yeah.
It's not training montage and you're a hero. You know, the whole thing of her becoming the beekeeper was amazing, but then there's that moment where it's just like, it's not, wearing a costume isn't what's going to make you a hero, you know?
Yeah.
You need to come to terms with your powers. You need to come to terms with who you are, not the person that you're wearing before you can do it. And I love that. I'm a sucker for that as a trope, and the fact that they're sort of deconstructing it and doing it so well is just, plus, I mean, man, April Bowlby is just the best. But there's no shortage of great character arcs in this show.
There is, and I know, I mean, it's an unfair question in a way, and I struggle to answer it myself. I think Jane's story has the most meat in a way, and some of it's really quite harrowing. That might be my favourite just because it went into areas where I just could not have expected it to go. And she already obviously had a really rich storyline in season 1. Does make me really excited to see what they're going to do with her next, because obviously regards this quote-unquote Miranda / daddy, if that's who it is, as I suspect it is, what that means exactly for Jane going forward. Presumably, I mean, it does make me wonder, in the original plan for season 2's finale, was there going to be 2 battles?
Yeah, it was that kind of wrap
Because
up.
Jane is very separate at this point from what's going on with the candle maker, She's dealing with her own shit. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Is Jane going to come victorious in some way and then be able to help out the others? Or is it going to go the other way? Is she going to be defeated and then not be able to help the others? Are the two stories going to converge towards what was originally the finale, first episode of season 3?
See, I wonder, right, because when you think of how the Candlemaker's defeating the rest of Doom Patrol, it's through their imaginary friends. And what is Jane's manifestation going to be when she turns up? Is it just going to be the other members from the underground? Would the Candlemaker undo itself by giving physical manifestation to all of Jane's personalities?
That's a really interesting point. Could be that, yeah. I have full confidence either way they're going to make a good job of it. Yeah. So it might be Jane for me. That said, though, I really loved Larry's arc this season. It was great just to see him really explore his humanity in a way that, even though he got a great arc in the first season, I mean, it was very focused on his love affair from back in the 60s. That was the big thing that he had to deal with. And then, of course, there was that beautiful thing where he went back to visit his former boyfriend, secret boyfriend, who then dies. And all that stuff was beautifully handled. So there's certainly no shortage of that stuff previously. But I just thought the journey he had this season, it just hit on such real fundamental issues related to the core of his character. And it's the kind of stuff that, when you think about the way it wrapped up with the sort of iconography I was talking about earlier, it's the kind of story I really enjoy. I love the way it's subverting a lot of those tropes and subverting that iconography itself, but not in any kind of, proselytizing way. It's just done as a natural part of that character's development. I'm really loving Matt Bomer's performance and Matthew Zuck's performance. I love it, everything they're bringing. There's a real warmth about that character. And yeah, by the way, I think this is something I meant to say when we discussed season 1. I don't think I said it. One of the things I really like about that character, the way the character's portrayed, is that Larry is a really masculine man who just happens to be gay. Yeah. And the characterization of Larry never at any point touches on any of the cliche tropes that we have come to associate with gay men in fiction. And he's never stopped being masculine, but he's a masculine man who's also sensitive, but also has a lot of these very typical kind of toxic masculinity issues in his past.
He's a really complicated 1960s, character. Early 60s all-American hero guy.
Yeah.
Like down to a T, and he has, like you say, he has that sort of ingrained toxic masculinity of that time. Mm-hmm. And none of that affects the fact that he is a gay man. It's just... Yeah. He is this complete rounded character. I also love the fact that they've got Matt Bomer as a voice actor.
Right, yeah. One of the most ludicrously handsome people on earth, yeah. One thing I wanted to bring up that was my only quibble with this season, and it's not a huge quibble, it's just something that I thought about now and again because I'm the kind of person that thinks about these things. They introduced 2 characters this season who were black women, and both of them turned out to be antagonists. And I'm like, I can't decide whether that's a problem or not. I mean, it's not a huge problem, but it was something that did strike me as I was watching the season the first time. I was like, that's odd you've deliberately cast 2 black women and made them both antagonists. That said, though, who knows where Ronnie's character might go. Mm-hmm.
Ronnie strikes me as she's not going to be full-on antagonist.
I mean, I'm already quite sympathetic to her character anyway.
Even when she's murdering the guy, that you're like, yeah, fucking deserved it.
I'm not fussed about the fact she killed that guy. It's fine.
And I guess we're probably going to see the true face of the person that's wearing Miranda's personality.
That's true, yeah. I love both of those actresses as well, which I guess is why it was something that was really... I thought both those actresses really brought such great energy to this show. Yeah. The actress who plays Miranda looks amazing as well, which is one of those things that is important in a show like this. She just has a great aesthetic look to her, and there's something in her performance that there's just that right amount of sinister and just that right amount of charm and charisma. It was really nice casting. I thought both roles were really well cast. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it'll be fun to see where they go. On that note, let's just have a brief bit of speculation. Where do you think season 3 is going from here? I know it's an almost impossible question to answer, but
all I know about season 3 are the casting spoilers that we've talked about, but I'm not familiar enough with the comic book source material to understand what that indicates for the direction of the show. I only know that I will watch Michelle Gomez read the fucking phone book, so the fact that she is in Doom Patrol means that if I wasn't already insanely excited for season 3, I am over the top now.
Yeah.
She brings such like a wild energy to her roles that she's in.
She's amazing. Yeah, I mean, she's always great quality on screen. And let's be real, Doom Patrol is a show that is made for a Michelle Gomez performance.
Yep.
I don't know how anybody could be disappointed at the news that Michelle Gomez has been cast in this show.
I know who'd be disappointed by the news. The carpenters and set creators, because the scenery is going to be chewed to hell.
Yeah, between her and Dalton, are they going to share screen time together? Because holy shit, the only set they'll be allowed to occupy together is surely that painting. By the way, I don't know if Mr. Nobody will come back, but if he comes in as well...
I don't know if the screen could hold that many big personalities. That would be fantastic.
Incidentally, the character in Madame Rouge is another Silver Age character, and I can see this show going full, just taking all the most bonkers stuff from Arnold Drake's material from that era, but amping it up in a modern way. I mean, I think I've said this. I think I've said this to you before, but Arnold Drake's Doom Patrol stuff really is bonkers by Silver Age standards.
Did Grant Morrison take Arnold Drake's stuff and play with it as well, or?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. I mean, all of the main writers of Doom Patrol have done that in their different ways. Incidentally, Arnold Drake, I do remember there was a quote somewhere where he said, of all the writers to take up the mantle of Doom Patrol, Grant Morrison, he felt was the only one that got it right. So it gives you an indication that Arnold Drake was trying to aim for something that was kind of be ahead of its time, really.
Yeah, something that like the comics code and stuff would have
right,
denied.
Exactly. Yeah. So when Grant Morrison started doing it, Arnold Drake was very much like, oh yeah, that's what Doom Patrol was supposed to be.
Nice.
So yeah, and I feel like the show is really remaining true to that kind of ethos. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
As the ultimate outsiders team, they're the ultimate underdog superhero team.
I mean, they're barely even a super team. I mean, I said it earlier, but this whole season was a dysfunctional makeshift family of freaks just dealing with their shit. The fact that they kind of have sort of super abilities is secondary, even tertiary to the plot.
So, before we wrap up, Craig, 5s out of 9 for Doom Patrol Season 2.
Well, in news that I'm sure will shock absolutely nobody who's listened this far into this podcast, I am scoring Doom Patrol Season 2 the same as I would score Season 1, which is 9 5s out of 9. I love both seasons with no qualms.
Craig, gird your loins.
Loins girded. Loins waxed.
I am giving Doom Patrol Season 2 the same score as I gave Doom Patrol Season 1, which is 9 5s out of 9. Hit that button. Good shit. So hopefully, listeners who are Doom Patrol viewers, you've enjoyed our little trip down Season 2 memory lane. Hopefully, if you listen to this and you haven't watched Doom Patrol, I think it's safe to say that if you haven't seen Season 2 of Doom Patrol and you listen to everything we've said, you could consider it semi-spoiler free because there's so much stuff we've not had time to cover.
Yeah, I think the first question probably your mind right now is, did you make this up?
After our super long music episode, we thought it was best that we come back and corner a little bit more of our TV watching, especially one of the shows that are one of our 3 big shows.
Our big Trinidad,
yep.
For our Latin American listeners.
That we had overlooked a little when we were ramping up our Mr. Robot rewatch. Speaking of our Trinidad of shows.
Gird your loins, listeners. Some hot fSobReggaety news imminent.
Next episode 18. Episode 18 of an 18-hour series.
What other 18-hour series are there?
There's David Lynch's and Mark Frost's Twin Peaks The Returns.
Take a drink.
We alluded to this in an earlier episode.
We have been threatening this for some time.
We are going to do an episode by episode in-depth deep dive rewatch of Twin Peaks The Return.
That is what we are doing, and we're kicking off with, we're going to have a discussion for our next episode, looking back on the original series of Twin Peaks and what it means to us, how it was formative for both of us. We're going to get deep into that, and we're also going to talk about what kind of things were going through our head when we heard about the return being imminent. And yeah, it's going to be a nostalgia fest. And then the following episode, and for however many long it takes us, we're going to do an episode by episode Twin Peaks The Return. We might cover a couple of episodes in each podcast.
Yeah. For those of you who are here for the Mr. Robot, we are going to be starting off Mr. Robot Season 2 as well. We're not putting it off for the entirety. We're going to be popping back and forth.
We will be, yeah. We're not entirely sure what the specific schedule is yet, but please don't abandon us if you're looking for Mr. Robot Chat. Believe me, there will be plenty of Mr. Robot Chat to come, and our Season 2 Mr. Robot Rewatch will be just a little further down the line, but we're going to kick off with some Twin Peaks material for a little bit first.
Yep. So in the meantime, though, all it remains for us is to say thank you for listening. Thanks for sticking with us. It's always good to have you, particularly our Latin American listeners, but
we appreciate and love you all equally. You are all members of our makeshift family in Doom Manor. You can pitch a tent in our Skelexic track anytime.
We'll make you tiny, tiny pancakes. We'll make you extra tiny pancakes if you like what we're doing and you leave a review, maybe a rating on whatever service you get your podcast from. If you listen to this on YouTube, if you give us a like and a comment, it really helps. You subscribe over there and maybe tell a friend.
Yeah, any of that we massively appreciate, just as we massively appreciate you listening to this. In the words of Cliff Steele, one love. All right, well, with all that said, James, how's your drink looking?
It appears to be neither full nor empty.
All right, Paddy Ashdown, thanks for that.
It's a 1980s.
It's a hip reference to 1980s puppet satire spitting in it.
How's your rum looking there, Craig?
James, I have consumed somewhere in the region of 50% of this receptacle of rum. Or to put it another way, that is half the bottle. Toodle pip. You know what I realised we didn't do this entire episode?
What's that?
A podcast and a podcast.
Oh shit.
Well, that's at the end of the podcast. We've broken the format.
Fuck's sake, guess I'll have to fix that in post. fSobReggaety, Episode 17, Tierra Wax, was conceived by Craig Woods and James Hamilton, edited by James Hamilton, and is a production of Half the Bottle. The theme music is Colossal Estates, by Errors, available on Rock Action Records. Join our family of weirdos over on Facebook at facebook.com/fSobReggaety podcast, on Twitter at fSobReggaetycast, on Instagram at fSobReggaety podcast, or search YouTube for fSobReggaety podcast. Check out the links in the podcast description, including the exponentially growing fSobReggaety playlist on Spotify. Freeze, you bloody bastards.
If you tell a friend, if you maybe leave us a review and a rating on the podcast, download, listenage, fucked it. Don't know what I was saying there.
Well, I thought it went terribly well.
Start that again.